to become one of the largest powerhouses in terms of food, fiber, and bioenergy production. And stories about how science, technology, and innovation can transform a country, can transform the situation of a specific country. So I will start by touching on science-based tropical agriculture, how we use science, technology, and innovation to develop one of the most competitive and yet sustainable agricultures in the world. Of course, I'll be talking about public policies and how public policies, of course, we are talking about agriculture, but how public policies are helping Brazil to be more sustainable, to be more competitive, to be more efficient and provide food security, not only for our population, but for other countries in the world. I will talk, one of the specific public policies is the Low Carbon Agriculture Plan. We call ABC Plan Plus. So this is a public policy that I would like to share with you this morning. And of course, what is coming next to be continued, what we have already achieved, and what we are going to do in the near future. So that's the idea. As Singapore is also located in the tropical belt of the world, 1 degree. Whenever I go to a place, I like to check the latitude and the longitude of the country. So the latitude here is 1 degree north latitude. So you are almost on the top of the equator. As Brazil has most of its territory is in the tropical belt. So this is the most challenging area in the world to do agriculture. Why? Well, you have light, you have water, you have, in Brazil in our case, we have land, we have good temperatures to develop plants and animals, but on the other hand, you don't have snow, you don't have low temperatures, so you have a lot of pressure of pests and diseases. So this is one of the most challenging areas in the world to produce food, fiber, and bioenergy. And you need to know where it should point it to. I think it's that way. Yes. Okay, so this is a typical picture of the Brazilian Cerrado. The Cerrados is the second largest biome in Brazil, right in the heart of the country, 204 million hectares of land. And back in the 70s, that was the situation of the Cerrados. Retorted plants, Brazil was a net food importer, if you can imagine. We imported beef from Europe, we imported milk from the United States, and we imported beans from Mexico, just to give 3 examples. We have spread rural poverty. Brazil was a food insecure country. We have limited knowledge of our biome. So that was the situation back in the 70s. And then Brazil made a wise decision to establish a system, a robust system of science, technology, and innovation towards agriculture, towards the development of tropical agriculture. So it's very important to mention that until the 70s, we imported technology from other countries, from the United States, from Canada, from Europe, from other places in the temperate region of the world. But then, since the 70s, we started this, I like to call it the most fantastic saga that we had in Brazil, one of the most fantastic adventures that we had in Brazil, of transforming the country from being a food insecurity country to be one of the largest powerhouses in terms of food, fiber, and bioenergy. And we achieved that in less than 5 decades. So in less than 5 decades, Brazil was able to develop a science-based tropical agriculture without parallel in any part of the world. As you're going to see during my presentation here, I will share many information, many data, because I used to be a scientist. Now I changed to the administration, but we scientists, we love to share data and know whatever all the information that we give is all usually based on data. This graph is kind of busy, but I just want to draw your attention to the green bars. So we are talking about 1974 all the way to 2020. And that what happened in Brazil when you think about the production. So we moved from 36 million tons of grains in 1974 all the way to 240 million tons of grains 40 years ago. And on the red line, you see the amount of land that we use. So we moved from around 27 million hectares to 64 million hectares. So we increased the production 5 times, and we doubled a little bit more than 100% increase in total area. And what is the name of the game here? Technology. We were able to transform the landscape in Brazil, to transform the country, because we use a lot of science, technology, and innovation to transform Brazilian agriculture. So nowadays, we can say that we help to feed the world and to protect the environment. So currently, Brazil protects 2/3 of its territory as either protected or preserved forests, and I'm going to give you more data about this. We feed more than 800 million people in the world. So making all the calculation of what we produce and what we export and what remains inside Brazil, that was the information data published by Embrapa, more than 100 million people. And we export to over 200 countries. And as Mrs. Boy was saying here, 45% of all the animal protein consumed here in Singapore comes from our industries, our companies in Brazil. So this information, and I really like to share, I want to share the sources of information here. So this is Brazil, 850 million hectares, or 8.5 million square kilometers, and 66 of our territory is 5.64 million square kilometers, or 9 times the surface of France, 11 times the surface of Spain, 16 Norways, 15 Norways actually, 16 Germanys, and 23 UKs. I'm not making any judgment here, just doing the calculation, right? So this is just to bring into perspective, the size of the country and the size of our agriculture. We use 30% of our territory for agriculture, livestock, and forestry system, and information, and those are the sources. We also have data from NASA, FAO, University of Wisconsin, and other very important institutions to back this information. So currently, we crop 72 million hectares of land in Brazil on first and second harvest. So first harvest is 50 million hectares, and second harvest, 22 more million hectares. So we are talking here about 8% of our territory. Only 8% of our territory is used for crop production. And we have 90 million hectares of degraded pasture. So we can use technology to transform this degraded pasture into the production of food, fiber, and bioenergy. So, and where are those degraded pastures? So this is a map produced by one of our universities there in Brazil. You see the red dots, the red areas. They are close to the coast. They are close to the northeastern Brazil, some in the central Brazil. These are the 19 million hectares of degraded pastures. And we already show that using technology, we can transform this degraded pasture into food, fiber, and bioenergy production. And my point here is to show that these degraded pasture are far, far away from the Amazon biome. The distance between the city of Aracaju, which is in the seaside, northeastern Brazil, to Manaus, right in the middle of the Amazon, the rainforest, is the same distance between Lisbon and Moscow. So just to give you a perspective of how far away our agriculture is being developed, and why we do not need to cut a single tree from the rainforest to produce more food in Brazil. Although we know we have problems with illegal deforestation, we have problems with wildfires, and that's something that we still need to work better. So this is Embrapa, the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation, the organization that I'm proud to present to you this morning here. So almost 8,000 employees, more than 2,000 researchers, 43 research centers spread all over Brazil. We have 9 research centers in the Amazon region, and we have offices in North America and also Europe. This is a picture of one of the 43 research centers. This is a research center located in Mato Grosso in the city of Sinop. And they are very much involved in the development of integrated crop, livestock, and forestry system that I'm going to talk a little bit more in a couple minutes. So public policies, sustainability, and low-carbon agriculture, these are 3 issues that are very well connected in the case of Brazil. Most of the public policies that we have in Brazil for agriculture have the participation of Embrapa, so that is a very good thing that our congressmen, they demand, and our government demand Embrapa to provide scientific, sound information to propose public policies. So here I bring you examples of 4 different public policies. That's the Forest Code, is the first one that was created in 2012. It means it is related to control, expansion, and planned agriculture expansion. So if you have a farm in the Amazon biome, I'm not talking about the rainforest, right? I'm talking about the Amazon biome. If you have a farm there, by law, you have to protect 80% of your farm. You can only use 20% of your farm, and you have to save 80% of your farm for good, for the environment, for the environment. We have low-carbon agriculture, and I'll be talking about this. We have the RenovaBio with biofuels, and also we have the problem called Pronosolos, that we are mapping all the soils in Brazil. And last year, I was in COP26, and we released the map of organic carbon in the Brazilian soils. So the ABC Plus plan is the low carbon agriculture plan. It has 7 programs as I'm lining up here. So it's one of the largest programs in the world for low carbon emission in agriculture. We have different programs backing up the low carbon agriculture plan. So recovery of degraded pastures, and I already mentioned this, integrated crop, livestock, and forestry system, nitrogen fixation, and adaptation to climate change. So if you are a grower in Brazil, you go to either a public or a private bank, and you can apply for a loan. If you use one of those technologies, you have a lower interest rate for the loan that you're applying at the bank. So just to give you an idea, we already have more than 35 million hectares of no-till system, so we do not revolve the soil to produce food. Biological fixation, we use bacteria, we use rhizobium to sequestrate nitrogen from the atmosphere and deliver to the soybean grain. So last year, almost 90% of all the soybean in Brazil, 35 million hectares, used this technology. And because we are using a bacteria instead of using fossil fuel to produce nitrogen, we did not emit more than 100 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So we are saving resources for our growers, and we are, saving gas to be emitted in the atmosphere. Degraded pasture recovery. In the last years, we have recovered more than 9.5 million hectares have been generated. This is the area of Portugal. The whole area of Portugal was recovered in terms of degraded pastures. Just to give you an idea, we just had COP28 in Egypt. And of course, climate change and greenhouse gas emissions were debated. So according to the World Resources Institute, Brazilian agriculture is responsible for 1.05% of all the emissions. In Brazil, the whole sector, the whole economy in Brazil is responsible for 3%, almost 3% of all the emissions. Again, just to bring this information into perspective to compare with other countries. So You already saw this picture here today. This is the no-till system. Oops. Coming to an end here. Okay, so this is the no-till that protects the soil, incorporates carbon, and saves water. This is the rhizobia. If you never have had the chance to see how the bacteria attaches to the soybean root, so it's a symbiosis, right? The soybean helps, the bacteria to survive, and the bacteria sequestrates nitrogen and gives to the plant. So saving resources and greenhouse gases emissions. On the left side, you see pastures that were recovered, and on the right-hand side, you see degraded pasture. So that's what I'm talking about, 90 million hectares of degraded pasture that using technology we can recover. Integrated crop, livestock, and forestry system, that's a system that we started using back 25 years ago to recover degraded pasture. And nowadays, we have around 18 million hectares of integrated crop, livestock, and forestry systems in Brazil. So you have a crop like maize or soybean, and you have an animal that could be, beef cattle, and this is the Indian cattle that we have in Brazil, beef cattle, milk cattle, and you have a forestry component. And then we observed that using this technology, we can develop low-carbon products or carbon-neutral products. So we are working with one of the largest companies in the world, Nestle, to develop low-carbon milk. And as you can see, the cows are very smart. They stay in the shaded areas. We measure the temperature in the back of the animals. It's 4 degrees Celsius lower than the temperature that we had in the air, the surroundings. So less temperature, less stress, more milk. So we are converting more than 20 farms in Brazil. And I was, of course, because of my colleagues from Cotton that are participating here in this meeting, I brought this beautiful picture of the no-till cotton in Brazil. And as you can see, 90% of all the area on cotton uses no-till technology, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation here. 100% of the area uses, rotation with other crops. So if you are a cotton grower, you're not going to grow only cotton. You grow cotton, you grow soybean, forages, and others. And because of the technology that we use in cotton production, we calculated land-saving technology. So because of the technology that was used during the last 40 years, we saved 18.5 million hectares, which is equal to the areas of Hungary and Portugal. So imagine if we were not using that much technology on cotton production, we would have to deforest 18.5 million more hectares of land. So as I mentioned, science and technology will significantly contribute to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. We have public policies backing that. We have technologies backing that. We already have carbon neutral beef, and during the Q&A, I can explain more how we developed the carbon neutral beef. We are working on coffee, leather, calves, and etc. So what are the takeaways? And that's my last slide. What are the takeaways of our presentation here? Science, technology, and innovation transform Brazilian agriculture. Research and development are in the basis of many public policies. It's possible to produce and preserve the environment. These are two things that they can work together. They can be together. You can produce and you can preserve the environment. Science and technology can contribute to mitigate and adapt to climate change that we are seeing all over. And technology adoption has a land-saving effect. And low-carbon agriculture is profitable and can generate another harvest, which is carbon. So besides harvesting other stuff, you can also harvest carbon from your farm. And this is the last phrase here. Brains, not tractors, are the symbol of the Brazilian agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here. My name is Hian Lim. I'm from Singapore Food Agency. I'm the Deputy CEO at Singapore Food Agency. I'm very envy after hearing his speech because you have 64 million hectares of land. Notwithstanding, you have a lot of degraded pasture. Singapore for agriculture is only 1% allocated for our local production. And notwithstanding, you have huge Amazon forests to help you for carbon credits to elevate the pressure on GHG. So yeah, I hope we have a few percent of your luxury. Well, before I start, just a quick sharing about Singapore Food Agency. We are a very young and nascent agency. We started in April 2019 because the government felt the necessity to bring food security and food safety collectively under one house, as food security becomes a paramount priority for the national interest, given the pressure we have seen locally over the world, be it due to pathogens, due to world conflict, and more critically, I think in the next 10, 20 years, we will anticipate climate to have a huge impact for all of humans on Earth. So Food Agency has a mission to bring safe and secure food to our people in this country. Your Excellence, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity to join you at the Agri-Talks Brazier Singapore. Events like this provide a platform for the exchange of ideas, build networks and foster collaborations as we work towards a common goal, which is a secure and sustainable agri-food system. The global food system has experienced a turbulent and challenging time. The impact of climate change is felt on food production. Prolonged dry spells and heat waves have affected crop yield, and we see food production being affected across all continents. Intense rain, deluge, and floods impact livestock and damage food stocks, again in many parts of this world. The war in Ukraine and other global tensions have disrupted supply of food stock and grains, for example, to Central Asia, Europe, and Africa. Its impact is also felt in Asia, with price escalations in wheat, corn, and other feedstock. The disruption in supply and the resultant global shortage has caused hunger and hardship in many countries. The energy crisis in Europe has also caused the price of fertilizers to rise, making it out of reach to some farmers. The higher cost of transportation also results in price inflation. FAO estimates that the number of people facing severe food insecurity this year doubled from before COVID and Ukraine war. This is prompting policymakers around the world to focus more sharply on food resilience. For today's session, I would like to focus on how we are strengthening food security in Singapore. Singapore is vulnerable to supply shocks and disruptions as we import more than 90% of our food. For greater food resilience, we have set a 30 by 30 goal that is to be able to produce 30% of our food nutritional needs by 2030. This is not easy as we are a small country with less than 1% of our land used for farming and a population of more than 5 million. It will require us to grow more with less in a highly productive, climate resilient, and resource efficient way. Technology and innovation are key enablers as we journey towards our 30 by 30 goal. Singapore has been actively supporting the adoption of such technology and innovations in our agri-food industry. Our goal is to increase the resilience and productivity of our farming sector with better yield and business continuity for our farmers. To help more farmers, we have expanded our Agri-Food Cluster Transformation Fund earlier this year to cover more types of food and technology to enhance their capability, capacity, and sustainability. 60 million of Agri-Food Fund has been allocated to fund many of these ACT projects. We are encouraging innovation through research projects in the areas of sustainable urban food production, future foods, and food safety, science, and innovation. As part of our innovation movement, we started our national R&D program for food. which we called the Singapore Food Story R&D Program in 2019. We made an initial investment of 144 million and have made good progress in the last 3 years. The initial focus was on aquaculture and urban agriculture as well as future foods and food safety. To stretch the ambition of the Singapore Food Story R&D program, we will be investing an additional 165 million in the coming years. This brings our total commitment for the program to over 300 million. The step-up in investment is an expression of our government's commitment to food security and will be a great boost to our ongoing efforts in developing innovative food solutions. The Singapore Food Story 2.0 has a renewed focus to address food security challenges in 2 key areas. First, it will place greater emphasis on sustainability and the consequent challenges facing food security, focusing on intensifying sustainability and circularity as part of Singapore's climate change commitments. Second, it will focus on enhancing food safety amidst the emergence of novel foods. As we facilitate the growth of innovative and novel food solutions, it is important to ensure the safety of such food. Novel foods like alternative proteins have emerged in our markets and could in the future become a sustainable food source for Singapore and the world. As innovation, technology, and consumer preferences evolve, alternative proteins have the potential to contribute meaningfully to our 30 by 30 goal. 3 years ago, Singapore Food Agency established a regulatory framework and safety assessment approach for novel food. This framework enables companies that are producing novel food products to submit pre-market safety assessments of their products for SFA's review before they are allowed for sale. Through this framework, Singapore became the first country to allow cell-cultured meat to be sold locally. Singapore has taken the lead to establish regulations. Singapore is the world's first jurisdiction to grant regulatory approval for the sale of cultured meat in 2020. Recently, SFA approved the sale of food products containing soline in Singapore. Soline is a powder-like protein that contains essential amino acids and can be used to replace existing proteins in a variety of foods. It has the potential to transform the sustainability of a food, as the production of soline does not require the rearing of animals and is not reliant on agriculture, weather, or climate. With the advancement of novel food regulatory science and to facilitate innovation, SFA has been reviewing our regulatory framework and safety assessment approach for novel food. This year, we updated our framework to allow companies to apply to SFA for pre-market sensory evaluation and tasting of novel foods, which have not been approved for sale. To provide clearer guidelines to companies that are looking to use serum-free media in their production to lower costs of production, we have refined our requirements for biological products used in cultured meat and seafood production. This facilitative approach gives companies more flexibility in demonstrating the safety of their cell lines to address food safety considerations arising from genetic drift and genome instability. Next, beyond novel foods like cultured meats, we are also keeping abreast of alternative proteins like insects. Already consumed by many people around the world, insects have the potential to be a source of protein for human consumption, for animal feeds, as well as to contribute to the circular economy. In recent years, the commercial farming of insects for human consumption and livestock feed has been promoted by the FAO. SFA has also received industry queries from over 10 companies on the import of insects as food or animal feed. SFA has recently launched Singapore's insect regulatory framework that will guide our approach to insects for human consumption and animal feed. This framework is a result of a thorough scientific risk assessment of insects for human consumption and as animal feed, and took reference from the EU and countries such as Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and Thailand that have allowed the consumption of certain insect species as food. Singapore will allow the import and sale of insects and insect products for human consumption and animal feed. Notably, both imports are locally produced insects for food and feed must meet our food safety requirements. They are also subject to import conditions and additional pre-licensing requirements for the local farming and processing of insects and insect products. We are currently conducting public consultation on the implementation details and will take the feedback into consideration as we put in place robust surveillance regimes to ensure that insects, whether produced locally or overseas, are safe for consumers. As the insect sector is nascent to Singapore, we will also review our regulatory approach regularly, taking into consideration new scientific developments. In this regard, SFA welcomes the sharing of research findings and experiments from the industry, particularly in the area of food safety. Let me conclude. The global food challenge has become more pressing. Achieving a secure and sustainable agri-food system will not happen overnight. It requires holistic planning, strong support, and deep collaboration from stakeholders, including governments, farmers, and researchers. Singapore is keen to do our part for ourselves and the region. We are doubling down on Singapore Food Story to strengthen our food resilience goals. I look forward to more opportunities for partnerships and collaborations so that collectively we can build a sustainable, safe food for all. In particular, for our hosts and visitors from Brazil, Singapore would like to express our great gratitude to your country. Like Dilly said, we have benefited from the supply of pork, beef from your countries. Although Singapore is advancing aggressively into the future novel food, but still in the next 10, 20 years, we will still be eating beef and chickens and porks. Lastly, I'd like to congratulate and wish Brazil a successful campaign in the World Cup towards the championship. Tonight there's a match, so please stay alert and look out for the Switzerland versus Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Once again, how about a big round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And yes, Brazil takes on Switzerland tonight, 12 midnight. So, come on, Brazil. I'm rooting out for Brazil anyway. Anyway, right. If you have questions regarding the presentation earlier on, please go on ahead. The QR code is right in front at the screen. Okay. And then we'll take on your questions at the end of today's conference. Thank you. Right, let's move on to our next topic of discussion, which is perspectives on natural fibers and sustainable fashion. Wow, very interesting. So please welcome Mr. Ashok Hegde, the Global CEO for Fiber Agri-Industrials and AG Services at Olam International. Please take your seats for our panel discussion, sir. Thank you. Next, we'd like to welcome the president of the Brazilian Cotton Growers Association, ABRAPA, Mr. Julio Busato. Mr. Busato is a member of the Superior Council of Agribusiness of the Industry Federation of Sao Paulo State. And also please welcome Mr. David Payton, the co-founder and CEO of Cariuma, the brand which has reinvented the sneaker game and reshaped the industry by focusing on the sustainability of their product. Right, over to you, gentlemen. You can have a seat, take the microphone and lead us on the panel discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Julio Busato. I am agronomist and farmer, cotton, soybean, and corn growing in Brazil. And now president of ABRAPA Association Cotton Growing. Now I speak in Portuguese. Sorry, because my English don't is good. We use this. E agora? Ah, temos um problema técnico aqui, que as apresentações estão invertidas. Então, convido a você. You first, yes. Sorry. Can you take this?
Good afternoon, everybody. As he introduced, I'm Ashok Hegde. I'm from Olam Agri. We are a supply chain manager of agricultural commodities, and cotton is one of our commodities. We have a large operation in Brazil, and that's the context why I'm here. I mean, for those of you who are new to cotton, because I see topics ranging from shoes to food over here. The world produces about 26 million tons of cotton. It's produced over 32 million hectares of land. That's about 2.5% of world's arable land. About 60% of the cotton is grown by smallholders. So the important thing in cotton to know is it's a tale of two types. There are large farmers in Australia, in Brazil, in US, very sophisticated, large holding, good economic viability. And then there are smallholders in Africa, in India, in China, who have as little as 2 or 3 hectares per farmer. And therefore, their means, their capacity to improve yields, and their capacity to fund their business is very limited. Overall, the cotton sector supports about 350 million people. Now, this is an estimate, so you must take it with a pinch of salt. It's about 100 million in the farming community and 250 million in the processing business. Total 24%, you know, there is always this talk about polyester and natural fiber. Cotton represents about 24% of world usage of fibers. Moving on, what are the ESG concerns, the environment, social, governance concerns in cotton? The major concerns in cotton are related to, on the farm side, the use of fertilizer, the use of pesticide, and use of water. How much and how less water do we use in farming? This is the environmental impact of cotton that we all worry about. We also look at the socio-economic problems, especially in the smallholder area. That's why I clarified that some of this stuff like poor working conditions, child labor, forced labor, things like high debt of farmers, low realization amongst farmers, and gender inequality. These aspects are more relevant to the smallholder farmers in the developing countries like Africa, India, and China. So when we talk about sustainability in cotton, we are essentially talking about these concerns that we need to address in the supply chain. So what is sustainable cotton? So what is sustainable cotton? Cotton that is grown, that is less harmful to the environment, cotton that has less GHG emissions, cotton that equips the farmers to produce climate resilient crop. That means the farming practices are such that the farmer gets a good yield and a good revenue despite climate pressures. Lastly, it creates a socio-economic impact in the societies that we operate. It improves the livelihood of people around over there and whether they are given fair wages for what they do. And lastly, that it is traceable, that you know where the cotton is grown, how is it grown, and so on. some of the key cotton sustainability initiatives, and I'm just giving here 3. There are many of them you saw on the last slide. The leading out of them is Better Cotton. Better Cotton is an agency that certifies cotton, and you'll see here that almost 11% of the global land and about 18% of world production is certified by BCI as sustainable cotton. This involves 2.9 million farmers. There are others like CMIA and other agencies, but BCI is the leading operator in this segment of sustainable cotton. This is to give an idea of Better Cotton's reach. You'll see here Brazil is one of the largest supplier of BCI cotton in the world. It's done very well, and hence Brazil is a front runner in supplying sustainable cotton to the textile value chain. It works with, as I said, 2.2 million licensed farmers across the world. Many of you would be curious because we hear a lot about organic vegetables, organic fruits. So what happens in organic cotton? The big impediment to organic cotton expansion is the use of GMO seeds. Organic cotton doesn't consider GMO seeds as acceptable. 90% of world cotton is grown on GMO seed. It is only in Africa and Turkey that we have non-GMO seeds being utilized. And therefore, it's hard to increase the quantity of organic cotton for this reason. The second constraint about organic cotton is that it is very labor intensive, and therefore you need the manual shortages of today to be dealt with before we increase the quantity of organic cotton that is produced. Lastly, the waiting period to convert non-organic cotton into organic cotton is a 3-year gestation period. Farmers have to put up with low yields, high costs during that period, and nobody in the chain is willing to fund that cost. What we need really is the entire supply chain to fund that waiting period to allow farmers to grow sustainable and organic cotton. Lastly, unlike food products, where you consume the product and you believe that organic cotton, organic food might do you some good in terms of health, and we'll hear from him on the shoes as well. The challenge here is when it comes to organic cotton, people don't consume it, and hence the benefits are realized at the growing area, where you have good socio-economic impact, you have positive environmental impact, but you don't feel the features as you wear the cotton, or as you use the cotton, or as you consume the cotton. So apart from kids wear, there is very few areas where people are willing to pay a premium for organic cotton unless they're socially aware and conscious. So what do consumers and retailers and brands want? Consumers, as we see, are more aware, and hence they want products that are traceable. They want to know where those products were grown, how they were grown, what impact it created on society when it was grown. So they are conscious about it. They would like to check the traceability. They go to a store, they say, how do you verify this is sustainable, traceable? They like to check that. But one of the biggest problems we see is that consumers are not willing to pay the premium required to fund these costs. And they would say that's good to have. We'll associate ourselves with sustainable brands. But at this point, they're unwilling to pay the premium. In my view, this is a gradual process by which you build awareness. And as you keep providing it, it will slowly become an inevitable part of doing business. And eventually, the premiums will flow. As far as retailers or brands are concerned, I think the key trend is increasing legislation. In Europe, we have more and more legislation coming which require retailers to have traceability and full chain of custody of what they sell. And therefore, this is also going to be another area why sustainable cotton will become inevitable in our lives. So what are the challenges in increasing sustainable cotton products? One of the big challenges is really non-availability. Only 20% of world cotton is sustainable. The costs are high, and therefore it's hard to kind of plan your production cycle, plan your products with such limited availability of certified sustainable cotton. The second is driving traceability is difficult because the textile value chain is very fragmented. You know, we buy from the farmers, we sell to a spinner, the spinner sells to a yarn to a weaver and a knitter, the fabric is sold to a garment guy, and the garment guy then makes the products and then puts it forward to the brands and retailers. So in order to have chain of custody through this is extremely difficult. Thirdly, between these various sections of value chain, there is no collaboration. The manufacturers have their own standard, the growers have their own standards, and the supply chain managers have their own standards. There is no consolidation that brings everybody together to say that as a textile industry, this is what we need to do to offer sustainable products. And lastly, as I said, sustainability costs between 1% to 5% extra. And everybody is searching who incurs and who bears the cost of that incremental, the cost that is incurred in having these sustainable products. So what are the future trends in sustainability? One is regenerative fashion. People want products to be sourced where you have regenerative agriculture. We have good practices at the raw material sourcing level. So that's the first one. Second is recyclable textiles. People want to test whether the products can be recycled or whether it will go into landfills. We have a lot of talk on fast fashion these days, and fast fashion generally relies on synthetic fibers. And so therefore, there is pressure that you have recyclable textiles. Number three is that you have science-based targets. So nowadays we have retailers, companies having to declare what they're doing to reduce their carbon footprint. There is more objective science-based targets. And lastly, as I said, there is more regulation. I just briefly cover what Brazil is doing in this regard, since they are our hosts today. So Brazil produces 2.3 million tons of cotton, and each bale of cotton from Brazil is tagged to a QR code. It has a unique identity. It is the starting point of traceability and chain of custody. 100% of Brazilian cotton is HVI tested, and we have a Brazilian responsible cotton program that certifies farms that are committed to good agricultural practices. As an evidence of that, we have 183, that is a bit too much though, but 183 certification items required to meet the requirements within the country. 80% of Brazilian cotton is certified sustainable, and 42% of world certified cotton is also supplied by Brazil. So Brazil has done a great job with regard to supporting sustainability aspects of cotton. I briefly cover what Olam is doing in this regard. You'd ask for all this that you said, what is it that Olam does? We work in the smallholder communities in Africa, where we work with about 325,000 small farmers. They farm about 450,000 hectares. Our role there is to give them agri inputs, whether it's fertilizer or pesticide, give them agronomy advice, and help them improve yields. I mean, just as an example, when we took over cotton chard, the parastatal in chard, the crop was 8,000 tons. We are about 55,000 tons now in 4 years' time. So we've had a 6 times increase in yields in chard after we took over, just as an example of what we do over here. We also have full traceability from these farmers till the spinner or the processor, because we are working directly with these farmers. And we have deployed digital solutions that allow us to track. I mean, in Brazil, the grower network has the means to do all of that. In our case, we are the ones providing farmers with that facility. This is just a few examples of what we do. Yeah. We work generally with NGOs and developmental agencies to provide this. So that's a positive part of working in Africa in these countries, the Gates Foundation, Mitsubishi. Many corporates want the ability to execute on the ground. And we provide that ability to execute. They provide the funding, we co-share the costs. So schools and hospitals and other welfare methods that are required to improve the livelihoods of farmers, we do a lot of those mainly in Africa. Working jointly with developmental agencies, be it IFC and so on. I just have half a minute left, so just sticking to time. In summary, I think there's a long way to go in improving and increasing the percentage of sustainable cotton in our midst. One of the first things to do is to improve traceability. It is not as if remaining Brazilian cotton not sustainable. The bigger challenge is to have traceability and chain of custody as we go through the supply chain, and that requires some industry-wide coordination with the processors, with the farmers, with the brands, to be able to implement and enhance sustainability in our lives. Thank you.
Agora sim, minha vez. As apresentações estavam invertidas, apesar de que eu tranquilamente poderia fazer a apresentação do meu colega da Holanda. Quero, primeiramente, agradecer à embaixadora Eugênia pelo apoio que tem nos dado aqui em Singapura, aqui na Ásia, ao diretor Lucas Fiuza, da PEX, pela parceria que nós temos no projeto Apex Brasil, a deputada Delis Boi, por nos receber, o presidente da Embrapa, Celso Moretti, que nós temos trabalhado muito juntos, meus colegas palestrantes e a todos vocês aqui presentes. Vamos ver se eu... aqui. Ok. Então, nós vamos falar sobre o algodão e a importância que o algodão tem no mundo. Como o meu colega falou, mais de 350 mil pessoas no mundo vivem do algodão em mais de 80 países. O algodão ocupa 2,5% das terras do mundo e representa 24% de toda a tecelagem do mundo. E usa 80% dos têxteis são feitos de algodão para roupas e para cama, mesa e banho. Mas o algodão não é só fibra. O algodão possui também óleo, que pode ser usado em cozinha, pode ser usado em biocombustível e em várias outras utilizações. Tem uma que todo mundo gosta, que o linter do algodão participa muito da moeda, do dinheiro de muitos países, né? E o desafio é como produzir algodão sustentável. Hoje existe uma cobrança muito grande a nível mundial em termos de produção com sustentabilidade. O que nós vemos são legislações sendo formadas, principalmente na Europa. Nós, lá no Brasil, partimos na frente, porque nós temos o Código Florestal Brasileiro, que é uma forma de legislação aonde os produtores têm que preservar parte de suas fazendas. Políticas, cobranças de melhores políticas de produção, também os setores cobrando responsabilidade de produção e os consumidores, principalmente, que são quem ditam as regras, fazendo essa cobrança por sustentabilidade e por rastreabilidade. E o que nós estamos fazendo nessa questão? O algodão, por si só, ele já é uma fibra que tem sustentabilidade, quando nós compararmos com outras fibras, principalmente as fibras sintéticas. O algodão é uma fibra biodegradável, é uma fibra natural e que não emite microfibras nos rios, nos mares, que hoje é um grande problema. Quando se lava os sintéticos, eles liberam essa microfibra que um dia vai voltar para nós. Então, o algodão tem essas particularidades. E o que nós estamos fazendo no Brasil? O Brasil, em 1997, era o segundo maior importador mundial de algodão, importando 1 milhão de toneladas de algodão. E hoje nós nos tornamos o segundo maior exportador mundial de algodão, exportando 2,3 milhões de toneladas. Nós produzimos 2,9 a 3 milhões de toneladas, abastecemos a indústria têxtil brasileira com 700 mil toneladas e o restante é exportado 99% aqui para a Ásia. Por que nós, produtores, queremos plantar mais algodão? Nós também somos produtores de soja e produtores de milho. Mas o algodão, ele se encaixa muito bem no nosso sistema de produção, plantio direto, como o presidente da Embrapa falou aqui, aonde 96% do algodão brasileiro hoje é produzido na região do Cerrado brasileiro. 70% é de segunda safra, ou seja, o agricultor planta uma safra de soja, rapidamente ele colhe essa safra de soja e planta uma safra de algodão. E no ano seguinte ele planta uma safra de soja, depois ele planta o milho, planta capim no meio do milho e ainda engorda umas vaquinhas nesse capim. Então, quer dizer, é um sistema que só no Brasil é possível. Esse sistema não é irrigado. 92% do algodão brasileiro é produzido em regime de sequeiro. E aí, nós nos unimos, os produtores de algodão, nas associações estaduais, que são 9 associações, coordenadas pelos programas da Abrapa. E aí, nós formamos uma tecnologia junto com a Embrapa, universidades públicas, universidades privadas, criamos institutos de pesquisa, criamos fundações de pesquisa e todos juntos criamos uma tecnologia que melhora cada vez mais o nosso solo, incorporando matéria orgânica, apreendendo CO2 da atmosfera e colocando no solo. E isso nos dá hoje a maior produtividade de algodão não irrigado do mundo. Nós conseguimos colher o dobro de pluma na mesma área que o nosso colega produtor norte-americano e 4 vezes mais do que o nosso colega produtor indiano. Então, nós estamos economizando terra e produzindo mais. Nos últimos 5 anos, nós dobramos a produção brasileira de algodão. E podemos fazer isso de novo. Como? Por que fazer isso de novo? Ora, nós temos nesse sistema de segunda safra plantado hoje 1,3 milhões de hectares. Mas a área que nós temos para isso é 14 milhões de hectares. E por que nós não plantamos mais? Porque nós precisamos de 2 coisas. Primeiro, rentabilidade da cultura. Segundo, conquistar mercado, que está aqui na Ásia. E o que nós fizemos para isso? criamos o programa Cotton Brasil, junto com a PEC, junto com o MRE, junto com a ANEA, e nós estamos divulgando aqui na Ásia que nós temos algodão em quantidade, nós somos o 4º maior produtor mundial, o 2º maior exportador mundial e seremos o 1º. Fornecemos algodão 12 meses por ano. Qualidade. Nas nossas pesquisas, nós temos melhorado enormemente a nossa qualidade. Rastreabilidade. Nós temos um sistema, que eu vou mostrar depois, nós sabemos aonde e por quem cada fardo do algodão brasileiro foi produzido e aonde ele foi beneficiado. E a rastreabilidade, que é o nosso sistema Algodão Brasileiro Responsável, que é hoje o programa mais completo a nível mundial. E eu quero passar um vídeo mostrando aqui o Cotton Brasil, para mostrar o que nós estamos fazendo. Mais?
In view of so many transformations in the production and consumption process, Cotton Brazil represents a new step for Brazilian cotton in the global market. After 20 years of constant innovation, research, and investments led by Abrapa, the Brazilian Association of Cotton Growers, its members and partners, it is time to offer the textile universe a raw material that constantly seeks to evolve in quality and sustainability. The market prioritizes transparency, and Cotton Brazil fosters Brazilian cotton, emphasizing its support of the environment and its promotion of social and economic development. In our scenario, advanced technology and agricultural management tools add to the dedicated expertise of trained professionals to develop precision, sustainable growing practices. Supported by its calling for hard work and the search for continuous improvement, Brazil remains one of the main agricultural suppliers of food and raw materials in the world. We value productivity. We pride ourselves on being the 4th largest producer, 2nd largest exporter, and the largest supplier of cotton licensed by the Better Cotton Initiative, or BCI, in the world. And this journey gives us the confidence to evolve and go further. Our field science is aligned with the delivery of a product increasingly in tune with the demands of buyers, spinners, and apparel manufacturers in Brazil and around the world. In Brazilian cotton, one will find proof of origin, traceability, quality, technology, sustainability, and now consistent year-round supply. Thanks to a constant increase in productivity. Count on Cotton Brazil. Step by step, we grow for a better future together.
Muito bem, esse é o gráfico do nosso crescimento do algodão brasileiro responsável. Como vocês percebem, nós crescemos muito nesses 10 anos. Nós tivemos muito trabalho, muita dedicação e muito investimento dos produtores para chegar a esses números. E nós queremos chegar a 100% do algodão brasileiro com o selo Algodão Brasileiro Responsável. Nós temos hoje 86%. Esse slide o colega já apresentou, né? Hoje, o ABR ele origina 42% de todo o algodão BCI do mundo e 32% de todo o algodão certificado no mundo. E por que ele é o programa mais completo a nível mundial? Porque nós temos 3 pilares. Nós temos o pilar econômico, que quer dizer o seguinte: a cultura do algodão ela tem que ser rentável para o produtor de algodão, mas para todos que participam da cadeia produtiva. O pilar social, que nós precisamos cumprir 100% com a legislação trabalhista brasileira e com as normas da Organização Internacional do Trabalho. E o que torna o ABR o programa mais completo a nível mundial é que ele tem o pilar ambiental, que é cumprir com o Código Florestal Brasileiro. E nisso nós preservamos das nossas fazendas, nós compramos, pagamos, não usamos quase 40% de nossas propriedades preservadas com vegetação nativa. Esse slide também já foi comentado pelo colega, o meu tempo está andando muito rápido aqui. Essa é vamos dizer assim, os reconhecimentos que nós temos a nível mundial desse trabalho. E olha que eu tenho, nós estamos fazendo as missões compradores, já fomos Paquistão, já fomos para a Turquia, Bangladesh, fomos para a Indonésia, Tailândia, e estamos vindo do Vietnã. E olha, só elogios ao algodão brasileiro. Eu acho que realmente o nosso trabalho está funcionando, nós estamos no caminho certo. Esse slide já foi comentado pelo presidente Moretti, mas para ver a forma como usamos o nosso território no Brasil, nós só usamos 8% do território brasileiro, 8% para produzir tudo o que produzimos de grãos e fibras. E preservamos 66% do território brasileiro com vegetação nativa, principalmente com a floresta amazônica. Esse é o nosso tema de rastreabilidade. Se vocês passarem o QR Code do seu celular, vocês vão ter todas as informações de que fazenda foi produzido esse fardo e aonde ela foi beneficiada. Agora eu quero mostrar para vocês, para encerrar, essa calça aqui. Essa calça aqui, ela é única no mundo, ela tem uma diferença. Não sei se vocês conseguem ver, mas ela é diferente. Não é porque ela está rasgada, é porque ela tem esse QR Code aqui, né? E nós tínhamos rastreabilidade e sustentabilidade da fazenda. E aí nós pensamos, por que não fazer isso na cadeia como um todo? E fizemos. E vou passar um vídeo aqui para vocês verem, que é o primeiro programa a nível mundial em grande escala de rastreabilidade ponta a ponta.
Ever heard of Responsible Brazilian Cotton Certification Protocol, known as ABR for short? It all starts back on the farm, where certified cotton production must meet 183 criteria related to the environment, to labor laws, and to economic transparency to be certified. With proven origin, ABR cotton is moved from the farm to the ginning plant, where the lint is separated from the seed and from impurities. Now to the spinning mill. This is where the certified fiber is transformed into yarn before moving to the next step. Now the yarn is combined and interlaced on looms until finally taking the form of woven or knit fabric. Garment manufacturing is the next stop. Here, the clothes are ready to be sold, and after this long journey, clothes go to stores or e-commerce channels. There, you choose ABR cotton in some of our partner outlets and get to know the entire path it's taken, all thanks to a QR code and blockchain, traceable from farm to closet.
Nós temos 2 marcas parceiras hoje no Brasil que aceitaram esse desafio, só que nós temos agora mais 1.200 marcas parceiras que vão ter acesso a esse tipo de programa. Então, deixar aí para vocês o QR Code. Embaixador, essa calça aqui eu vou lhe dar de presente no final do evento. Então, obrigado a todos.
Well, first of all, Your Excellency, thank you so much, Eugenia Batelmes, for the invite. And as a Brazilian living in Singapore, I must also praise that I'm very grateful for all the support that you and all the Brazilian embassy offer to the local community. Thank you so much. And for me, it was a pleasure to come and share with you our case, Cariúma. Because in a way, since we're in a mission to reshape our industry, that is the second largest polluting industry in the world, the fashion industry, we're in a mission to reshape our industry through the best sustainable products while recovering the environment. So exactly the questions that my friends, speakers just posed to us on who's going to pay for the premium, how all those hard work upstream on the supply chain can come and to be valued and to scale. We are exactly following that direction in a bigger belief that how the industry and how consumers are taking shape in the next 10 to 30 years. So, Cariúma. I founded the brand with a co-founder, Fernando Porto, that is not here today, but we both come from the fashion industry. So that's where the drive came from, having operated one of the largest footwear companies in the world, seeing from the inside how things are done. And we decided to do things really differently. Cariúma is our expression of that, and we are all about embracing fashion, sustainability, surf and skate, that are our personal passion, and offering that at an affordable price point. So putting that together is what we see as extremely powerful to go there and gain market share from the most established brands in the world. Who are our competitors? Those upcoming guys like Vans, Nike, Adidas, well, they have potential, but we're here. And a great example of how we're doing things differently is that we are a B corporation. So we see that as one of the highest standards in assessing sustainability in any given company, over 600 topics to be assessed and audited. And we are the highest scoring footwear industry in the world. So that's great validation, and I think that touches on a crucial topic that was already mentioned, on how we must find ways to translate what we do with credibility to a bigger audience. And yes, we leverage on globally recognized certifications because it's a great way to provide proof. And a substantial part of it, and I think one of the key questions that our customers make in understanding what is a sustainable brand is about our input. It is about our material. And that's one of the reasons that gives me joy to share with you that is involved in the upstream, in the hard work of making a better crop, a better input that has many barriers. But now that we see that is being not only being overcome but by us, brand, but because there's a great energy coming from the consumers understanding all aspects of what we do. And yes, our material is a substantial part of it. Of course, a shoe has 40 components, so we have a similar work, and cotton is a major component of our shoes, but from other components as well. And our vision for a sustainable brand also goes beyond. It really tells of all our practices, from supply chain to production, to distribution, to sourcing, but also to giving back. As I mentioned, our mission involves recovering the environment, so we see ourselves as protagonists on some of the great work of recovering native forests, like we just heard from all the cotton producers. We have planted over 1.8 million trees already on an ecological restoration project that we started in June 2020. That has a great work in the rainforest of Brazil, in the Cerrado biome that was already mentioned, and we have recently expanded also to the Amazon. And that's a picture of our seedlings nursery in the municipality of Itu in São Paulo. And all this that we do is because we are trying to be a globally recognized brand. And our consumer is maybe the most sought after in the world. 20% of our sales is to California alone. Mainly women 30 plus, really well informed about everything we're doing. So that puts us in a position of responsibility of really breaking down everything we do and backing up either with certifications or with science. A bit more of who our consumer is. But we are putting together a brand that is about fashion, yes, but it's also about performance. So that's a key topic of how we see sustainable brands succeeding. It is about not offering to the consumer any relevant trade-off. In our case, as a footwear brand, it is about comfort. It is about durability. It is about price. It is about sustainability and all the accreditations and carrying the premium of the supply chain that we have. But one very also relevant reason that makes us really proud of Cariúma is that we're not trading off performance as well. 3 weeks ago, our skateboarder, we have a full roster of professional skaters and surfers. 3 weeks ago, that guy on the picture, Gustavo Ribeiro, our Portuguese rider, was crowned the world champion of skateboarding. So Cariúma at the first place in the podium, competing against all those brands. And for us, the message is not about winning. It is about inspiring. It is about changing what brands mean. Because we are not just do it. We are not be number one. It's not. We are about the collective. And having a skater occupying the number one place in the world, for us, is a clear proof of this no trade-off approach. And for me, that's the responsibilities that brands have in unlocking all that progress that is pulled by the consumers. Yes, some quick data or a few facts about our business on how we're building this. We're incorporated and based here in Singapore with teams globally dispersed. We sold to 29 countries in the first 30 days of the brand, direct to consumer. Now we are in 700 skate shops around the world. But as a closing thought, I thought that the missing link in bridging consumers' preference and the upstream, or all the work done by the industry, is in the brand. And the brand needs to be able to, on one side, tell those stories in a very consistent way, in a way that consumers can relate to, but also really innovate in its processes. So telling stories and innovation, right? And I'll give you 2 examples of things we're doing. First, in innovation. The footwear industry has a key component or a key figure in sourcing product or raw materials. There are the agents. That's a hidden cost along the supply chain that brands incur, and I'm talking Vans, Nike, all of those, that we simply do not. But we could go directly to the supply chain because we come from the industry. And where do we invest the agents' fees? First, in building the internal team, for sure, but in buying better raw material. So that's how there's a key component of how we offset the premium of our premium raw materials. Another innovation, and that's a great link to telling stories. We have launched for skateboarders a program that we sell just 1 foot instead of a pair. Because skaters destroy the front foot on the skateboard because of the flick. So how do we offset the premium mentality on the minds of the consumers? Because yes, we charge a 15-20% premium versus Vans. Well, a Cariúma pair, I buy one, then I can only get 1 shoe to replace the one that is worn. Why are other brands not doing this? But that's one example of a key component of how to break that barrier and the perceived premium of a sustainable product. But we last longer. We perform better. And another, how to tell the stories, in the fashion industry, a key barrier of not accepting or adapting premium raw materials is actually how much the industry discounts products. And breaking that cycle is key to preserve gross margin and reinvest on the product. Right now, we just passed Black Friday. What did we do as Cariúma? And we got 3 times increase in sales. Instead of the Black Friday, once again we did the Green Friday. Instead of slashing prices, fueling consumption with less purpose just because of that impulse, we did the opposite. We preserved full price and we boosted the purpose on our products. Instead of planting 2 trees for every pair that we sell, we did 10 trees. So by telling those stories and being innovative, for us, is the way that we envision of reshaping the industry and unlocking many improvements along the supply chain. Thank you for the opportunity of sharing the story of Cariúma, and more than open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, gentlemen, for your sharing. You may take your seat. And how about giving them another round of applause as we say thank you. Thank you. Again, the QR code is displayed on the screen. So if you have any questions right after the sharing session and the presentation, please go on ahead and scan. And we'll be doing the question and answer segment later on. At the end of today's event. All right. Okay, let's move on to our next topic of discussion. This will be for agri-food innovation and financing. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Daniel Trento, the General Coordinator of Innovation in the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. And we also like to welcome Mr. Francisco Jardim, founding partner of SP Ventures, an investment fund which focuses on tech-powered solutions for agriculture and food. Gentlemen, over to you.
Is this the control? Yeah. Hi, good morning. For me, it's a pleasure here to represent the Minister of Agriculture. So I bring her greetings from Ministry Marcos Montes and Ms. Ambassador Eugene Dios Boy from Enterprise Singapore, and Fusa from Apex. We'd like to thank the opportunity to be here to show a little bit what Brazil is doing in the Brazilian innovation ecosystem. It's good to say that I'm honored to be now in the Ministry of Agriculture, but originally from Embrapa, from the Food Science Technology Research Center, which has everything to do with Ms. Boy explained. She mentioned about connecting hubs. That's one of the purposes that I'm here. I've been here in Singapore since Wednesday, talking with some organizations, Padang & Co, with Adam, and other organizations, in order to promote the Brazilian ecosystem. Also, I'd like to hear from Mr. Lim about sustainability and novel foods. That's what we're going to talking as soon as my presentation is on the screen. As Mr. Celso presented, we made in Brazil a revolution in one generation from importer. This was a picture of how our agriculture used to be in the past, and now it's one very common image that you can see. One of the visits I made here in Singapore, and I learned, even though it's a short time, but Singapore made a revolution in one generation. In urban planning, economic development, we can, regarding its proportion, we made the same in agriculture. We came from, this is one image in the north of Brazil, the city of Sinop, how it looked like in the 70s, and how it began in 2000, years 2000. Now it's bigger. The same happened in semi-arid region in Brazil. we changed these second images from 2000 plantations from grape, mango fruits, all both a certain part of them exported. So we are from an importer in the 70s, one of the biggest exporter of food, supporting the food security in the world. This chart Celso already showed you that we made this increase in our production based in science, technology, and productivity, remaining the cultivated area almost the same in 30, 40, and 50 years. The main exportation products we have soybean grains, sugar, chicken, soybean food, cereals, and so on. Main destination countries, China, European Union, Asia, and for Singapore, as the Singapore Food Agency last study presented, we respond for almost 50% almost of the chicken, 58% the beef, and pork 39%. Why I repeat these facts about the Brazilian revolution and shift from imported to exported? We can mention many factors, contributing factors for this, but I will highlight 3 of them, which is the rural entrepreneurship. If we didn't have Busatos, we didn't have producers coming from the south going to the center of Brazil, this revolution wouldn't happen. If we didn't have R&D, Embrapa, and universities working, adapting technologies and understanding the Brazilian fields, it wouldn't happen. And the last one, and the topic of our panel, money, capital. At that time, it was public capital. We had funding, credits, loans from public sector. We still have today, but that's when a big shift. Now, this revolution, we are preparing a second revolution, which is based in digital agriculture, in biological conservation, bio-based agriculture. We have one new player in this triangle, in these 3 pillars, which are the startups, the digital startups. So that's one new enter. And the second one, the private money, the private capital. How we prepare, in the vision of the Minister of Agriculture, our main mission is to prepare an environment to promote this kind of interaction. Private entrepreneurship, startups, financing, and based in research, development, and science, as it was made 30, 40 years ago. But nowadays, we have some limiting factors. We have some new trends, like carbon, climate, water, and other factors. If you see this, population growth, the green area are the growth of developing countries. So we have a more populated world in developing countries. This chart I used in 2012 in a presentation, and it shows a very important shift. The blue line is the rural population, is the place where people are living, rural areas. From 2012 up to now, the red one is people living in urban areas. So we had this shift, and it won't change in the future. It means road transition to an urban lifestyle. Singapore is an example of what is happening and how we can improve technologies to support this kind of new transition. This is the kind of image we have in Brazil. We don't have here this traffic jam. So that's why we are preparing the environment, preparing a flow of investments and promotion interaction about startup hubs, research universities, research institutes, and private companies, and VCs, like my colleague here will speak later. We have a study. We are monitoring the startups, which is very huge process in Brazil, a very dynamic sector, and we had, since 2019, 1,125 startups just focused in agriculture. 2021, even though in a pandemic year, we had more than 40% growth, more than 1 startup per day in the agriculture sector. But one thing you can see in the map, most of them, almost 90%, they are concentrated in the center, in the southeast and south of Brazil. Where are the universities? Where are the urban areas? Where are the entrepreneurs? where are the digital specialized people. So, but they are working for the agriculture in the Midwest. This year, we just released last week a recent study, this publication, with support of SP Ventures and Embrapa. Excuse me. And now, updating this number, we have more than 1,700 agtechs, startups. And then we divided this study, used to divide before the farm, where are the supply chain, inside the farm, the monitoring technologies, and after the farm. All the processing, the post-harvesting, transportation, logistics, and you can see that almost 50% are after the farm. Here are some examples about the topics, and then I can show and share with you the complete study after the presentation. But we see also in a parallel process a growing number of innovation hubs in Brazil, like Padan & Co. We have already more than 50 innovation hubs focused on agriculture. And another last week new is about the PwC just announced the acquisition of one of these hubs, which is AgTech Garage. We still have more 49. And then this is one of the processes that is going. Other companies are seeing value in this kind of space to promote interaction among private sector, public sector institutes. And that's one of the topics they are working: traceability, data analytics, connectivity, food techs, agro fintechs, decarbonization, alternative protein, energy transition, and so on. Another point, we are working with Apex Brazil, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, the Ministry of Agriculture, is the internationalization of Brazilian startups, and also promoting the process of bringing disruptive startups from all over the country to Brazil in disruptive topics, such as cell-cultivated meat. We just did an experiment, is still going on, with an Israeli startup called Aleph Farms. They already partnered with BRF, and they are preparing a big plant of cell-cultivated meat in Brazil to have scale to support this transition in the world. We see the same happening with other companies. And on the other side, we are partnering with different countries. Here you can see Japan. Brazil and Japan signing an agreement to develop digital agriculture. China, we just made a promotion and interaction about Brazilian hubs, like I showed, and Chinese ones. And there were selected 8 Brazilian startups to be incubated in China in order to open markets for Brazilian startups based on their experience and expertise in agriculture. Well, when we go for VC, Chico is the best person to talk about, but just to give you an overview, the Brazilian GDP responds for more than 30% of Latin America GDP. But the agriculture sector is almost 25% of Brazilian GDP. So it shows the importance of investments in the agriculture sector in startup movement. Just last year, almost 4 billion, at least. 2020, it was $4 billion US dollars investments in this sector. Last year, we had 5 times more, almost 15.7 billion investments. It means that I will now make a dispatch for food techs in Brazil, so you can understand about that study. When you see after the farm, almost 50% of the startups, we have 37% working on novel foods, like our previous speeches said. Novel foods, we can say, plant-based foods, new technologies, new ingredients, and so on. After that, we have with 16% marketplaces. You know Shopee is from here. Why we don't have a Shopee for agriculture inputs or other products? And the third one, 10%, is logistics, one of the expertise of Singapore. So you can see about this chart, when we go for food tech, Brazil has many things to partner with Singapore. Still going on food tech trends, we see alternative protein. Our previous speaker talked about insects. We have huge investments in upcycling, vertical farming, also food loss, and different topics in this area. What we are doing as public, as a ministry in Brazil, we are connecting all the ecosystem. So since the last 3 years, we made a promotion, bringing the big companies, startups, entrepreneurs, funding, and working with open innovation, doing this kind of thing we are doing here, sharing experiences, bringing information to add value in our productive chains, food value. Regulatory framework. Singapore is the only place in the world you can sell and consume cell-cultivated meat. Brazil is discussing with Israel, is studying Singapore's regulation, and probably 2024 we will have this kind of regulation approved in Brazil. National Plan for Alternative Protein. The Minister of Agriculture next month, December, will be releasing a national plan for alternative protein. What this national plan says, how we can promote integration about universities. We know for a startup, digital startup, you just need a room and a laptop. But for food tech, you need laboratories. And we have laboratories in Embrapa, Research Center, universities. How can we promote this integration? Bringing startups to already existing labs and bringing money to develop this cycle. That's one of the things the National Plan for Alternative Protein will promote. These are just news, just released, that confirms what I'm saying. The BRF and Aleph Farms, the JBS building a lab for alternative protein in Brazil, Marfrig with ADM getting into US. Filter Burger is a Brazilian company, more than 20 countries, and they are investing in different plants, just with plant-based. So what those companies say? We offer protein. It doesn't matter if it's animal or alternative protein. It's not a question of one or another. It's one and another. The public, the consumer will choose. They are big distributor companies. So if we have possibility to work with alternative protein, they will work and keep with the animal protein with sustainable base, like Celso just presented, sustainable grass beef, and that's the thing and the strategic vision. And we have no doubt, I'm going for my last slide, the future of agriculture will be digital and will be biological. So that has everything to do with the mindset of Singapore. It's sustainability and digital. Just to confirm that I'm not saying just some news, this was the base of our work in the Ministry of Agriculture since the last year, based on sustainability as axis of impact, food security, Brazil as a food security and food supplier, but also thinking about the food safety and understanding that society has every time more power to decide and to influence the productive chains. Based on that, our strategy in the ministry was sustainability, bioeconomy, digital agriculture, open innovation, and food tech. Thank you very much, and I stay here for some questions.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here. I wanted to thank Apex and Madam Ambassador, Your Excellency, and all of you here from Singapore for having this such a warm welcome and having the opportunity to be here. I'm going to start sounding a little bit repetitive with all my fellow colleagues, but I think it's definitely worth mentioning and repeating. I arrived a couple days earlier to become acclimatized to the jet lag, and I had the honor of visiting the National Museum of Singapore this weekend. And I was overwhelmed with the size of the breathtaking progress that Singapore has done over the past 60 years. And it's a progress that was pillared on hard work, innovation, and extensive investment in human capital, very similar to what has been the success of Brazil's agribusiness. And based on this inspirational success story in Brazil, we chose to start a company, SP Ventures, which has become the largest ag-food venture investor in Latin America, Today, we have invested and deployed hundreds of millions of dollars of capital in almost 50 startups over the past 10 years, and we manage money from some of the most sophisticated and well-known ag investors in the world, such as Syngenta, Mosaic, Bunge, Yara, and the IFC. And what Latin America has built over the past 10 years has been one of the most dynamic and thriving tech ecosystems in the world. This started 10 years ago, but it really became relevant in numbers just 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, Brazil had never built a tech unicorn until we sold 99 Taxi, our ride-hailing champion, to Didi, the Chinese company, for $1 billion. And since that goal line, Brazil has built 37 tech unicorns. Last year, with the IPO in NASDAQ of Nubank, we built probably what has become the most successful neobank in the world, which reached the $50 billion valuation of Mr. Warren Buffett's investment. And the match and the convergence of this thriving tech entrepreneurial innovation platform with what is believed to be, by our generation of entrepreneurs in Brazil, as one of the most exciting opportunities is the building of the ag-food value entrepreneurial ecosystem in Brazil. So the problem is clear. Over the next 30 to 40 years, food demand is going to increase by 60 to 80%. This is going to be driven by growing global population. So when we started the business, we were at 6.7 billion people in the world, and the target was to reach 10 billion by 2050. Last week, we just crossed the 8 billion people mark. So this is clearly in full motion, and also enriching emerging markets, which radically change people's protein consumption, and calorie per capita. As people start to consume more and more animal protein, as we are very honored to supply 45% of Singapore's animal protein diet. And with this, we see many of the opportunities of the tech unicorns that were built in Brazil's consumer tech platform being built now in Brazil's ag tech platform, such as the building of a tech-driven financial services industry, the ag fintech companies. We see the disintermediation of value chains as we start to see the building of marketplaces and e-commerces in the ag value chain. And we see Brazil building one of the most dynamic biologics industries in the world. And why is this native entrepreneurial ecosystem so important in Brazil? As my colleagues have mentioned, Brazil is probably the only major large-scale success story of tropical agriculture. Compared to our temperate agriculture competitors, we have 2 to 3 harvests a year. We have integration of forestry, crop, and livestock. Because to adapt to this complex operational system, we've had to build our own ecosystem, producing science and entrepreneurial activity locally. And this is what we've seen thriving, a very sophisticated ag tech valley where we have cities like Piracicaba, which have become our Menlo Park of the Brazilian ag tech VC ecosystem. And we have seen innovation entrepreneurial activity thriving across the value chain with many very dynamic technologies, ranging from biotechnology to digital, inside the farm gates and outside the farm gates, and in the animal protein and in the vegetable protein value chain. And we are very excited with this vintage of tech startups for one very specific reason. We know that these major economic crisis opportunities tend to be very fertile soil for building remarkable tech companies. We have a lot more talent available. We have very strong changes in consumer preferences and behaviors. And we have traditional companies opening new flanks. And when we look at the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen many of these things become very present in ag. But contrary to previous economic crises, the one we faced in Brazil over the past 2 or 3 years has been deep-rooted in a health crisis. This has had a profound change in consumer behaviors as we've seen mobility shifts and we've seen mobility constraints. For example, in 2020, pretty much every single one of Brazil's agribusiness fairs were canceled. This has made many farmers have to leap to become more digitalized, to be able to buy and sell inputs, buy and sell farm equipments, and buy and sell their outputs on platforms. And this has accelerated digital adoption. It's accelerated biological adoption. And one thing that has become clear over the past couple of years as well is that ag tech is climate tech. when we want to transition our agriculture to a low-carbon agriculture, and if we want to guarantee that we'll be able to continue to feed 800 million people and more in a much more challenging environment of climate change, we need to do it through radical tech adoption. We're going to have to build more reliable and transparent supply chains. We're going to have to make sure that financing, as farming is one of the most working capital-intensive businesses in the world, and we need to make sure that technology allows financing to continue to flow to farmers in the region. And we need to make farming a more predictable activity. And we can only do this through intense technology adoption, and this is coming in the exciting new technologies from these young entrepreneurs. With that, I'd like to open also for further discussions later on, and it'll be an honor to engage more and more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're down to our final panelists who will be taking the stage and discussing on the various topics. So we're going to go with the next topic, which is sustainable food supply chains, private sector outlook. And it is time for me to welcome our panelists, Mr. Rogerio Morales, a well-known consultant on agribusiness and food industry with an extensive experience in the private sector. Joining him will be the CEO of Next Gen Foods, Mr. Andre Menezes. Next Gen Food is, as you know, are probably aware, a celebrated and world-renowned Singaporean food tech startup founded by a Brazilian native. Right, over to you, gentlemen.
It's nice seeing Andre again after, what, 3 years? Probably. We've been friends for many years, colleagues as well, brothers in arms in some projects here in Singapore as well. So very nice seeing you again, Andre. I'd like to start by thanking the embassy in Singapore and also Apex for the invitation. It's a pleasure to me to be here to share a little bit of the private sector overview, especially in my case, talking about the animal protein supply chain. So I'd like to start, if you could please turn on my presentation. All right, it's difficult not to be so repetitive here after so many brilliant speakers, but I think that this will show that the private sector, especially the animal protein sector, is very much aligned to all the initiatives that we have been seeing here before. Being in China, living in China for more than 10 years, and in Asia for 12 years now, I cannot start by giving you a little bit of context about the animal protein industry in Brazil. And I'd like to, how to do this? Okay, sorry. I'd like to do that by telling a little bit of the story of beef, chicken, and pork. How we get to the place where we are today, okay? First of all, we have to remember that beef started to be made in Brazil in the mid-1700s, a long time ago. At that moment, beef production was located in the south of Brazil. We had European breeds, and we are basically doing jerked beef, dried beef, that way to preserve the meat. And then producers would ship that all over to the north of Brazil. It would be distributed all over the country. But still, having European breeds limited a lot our production. So only 100 years ago, the first Indian breeds, the Zebu breed, the Nelore breeds, were introduced. And then these breeds were able to adapt to the weather conditions in the middle of Brazil, especially because these conditions were very humid and hot, okay? And this enabled us to have a big leap and start producing in scale. From that point on, in 1914, the first American and British multinationals came to explore Brazil. It was in the period of the big wars, right? So world needed supply. And also in 1914, we did the first export to the UK. From that point on, the sector started growing very fast until the year 2000, when we start seeing a big consolidation and the internalization of the Brazilian companies. In chicken, it was not very much different, only that it started a little bit later. It started in the 1930, more or less, okay, when the Japanese immigrants came to Brazil, and then Brazil started to see the beginning of its urbanization. Then in the 50s, we started to think about genetic improvement for our flocks. And then I can say that around 1960, more or less, the pioneer flagship companies like Sadia or Perdigão started to produce in a more massive scale. Then, same story in the 2000, consolidation. Both of us participated very intensive on that. And internalization of these companies, okay? I'm repeating here just what we have been shown before. And I would like to highlight the backbone of the success for the Brazilian animal protein industry. There are several factors, okay? But the first one is exactly the land and the way we preserve this land. We have seen this chart before, so I'll move on, but it's the bottom line here is that 66% of our territory is preserved, okay? Another very important point for us as animal protein producers is that we have abundance of grains. And you have all seen here how this is done on a sustainable way, okay? But nowadays, we are the first producer of soybean, we are the third largest producer of corn, and our processing regions, where we have our slaughteries and our factories, are very close to the grain production areas. But more important than that is to highlight that at least 70% of the production cost for chicken and pork is composed of grains. So the cost of grains, the efficiency of grains, and the availability of grains directly impact our costs and directly impact the results of the Brazilian companies. Another point to highlight is the efficiency of our supply chain. It's a very complex one. You have to think that it's a very capital-intensive supply chain. We need to invest back in the grains. We invest in livestock. We invest in production itself, logistics, not to mention marketing and distribution, okay? But all this supply chain is very much controlled and is not controlled by producers alone. We have a series of very important stakeholders that are present, starting with the Ministry of Agriculture, which does a remarkable job in terms of sanitary control of the industry in Brazil. I can say I've been traveling around the world for, at least in this industry, 25 years. Perhaps I visited more than 300 factories all around. And you won't find a system that is better than the Brazilian system in terms of sanitary controls. The vets that comes from the Ministry of Agriculture and are based in our plants, and each of our plants, they guarantee the quality, and they control the overall production of the goods that we deliver to our final consumers. On top of that, we have the associations working together, the industry associations working together with us. And finally, many independent surveyors and independent certifying companies that will guarantee that we cater specific demands of the markets we reach. Another point, and we didn't talk too much about this one here, but it's important to highlight, is the biosecurity of the Brazilian system. What I'm saying that we have in place through our Ministry of Agriculture and also through our associations, a series of prevention and monitoring programs that will enable us to prevent animal disease. So we are free of the classical BSE today. We are free of FMD with vaccination, and in 5 states in Brazil without vaccination. We are free of avian influenza, and we are free of African swine fever, and which is one of the big problems nowadays in pork production. So Brazil counts on a very, very safe environment in terms of animal disease, and that's, of course, a very, very important point to the sustainability of our production chains. So all of these factors brought us to be a key partner to the world in terms of providing food, providing food security, okay? Beef, nowadays, we are the #1 exporter in the world, and Asia is the main destination. As we have seen before, Singapore is one of very, very important partner of us in this sense. But also we cater China, we cater Indonesia, and there is still a long way to go because there are still markets to be opened in Asia for the industry, okay? Chicken, we are also #1 exporter. I wonder whether you know that a big part of the chicken rice we have here in Singapore is basically Brazilian chicken, okay? I'm sorry if I'm disappointing you, but by the taste you can say. And then chicken is very interesting because we've been conquering many markets, and today we export to more than 150 countries. Again, Asia is our main partner, but still there are markets as big as Indonesia that we are not yet reaching, and we will very much like to cater because we have capacity for that. Finally, for pork, there is still space. We are #4 now. We keep growing our exports, but we are in only 85 countries. Still, Asia is the main destination. So if we look at these 3 proteins, we see that the space where we play and the space where we are highlighting our performance is over here. Another point that I would like to explain here is the capacity of growth we still have. We have seen the presentation of Dr. Moretti about how we have improving our efficiency. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. But we still have room to grow, and we are very fast in adapting to our consumer needs. We are halal certified, we can provide kasher, we are BRC certified, which is the British Retail Consortium, and so it goes. As the consumers demand new features in our production, Brazilian entrepreneurs pursue the implementation of these features, and we then deliver that in a sustainable and stable way. And more than that, one thing that we have been seeing over the last 2 years, and I would like to share with you, is the resilience and the fast response of Brazilian animal protein supplier. And I'd like to give 2 examples. First of all, Singapore itself, okay? In March 2020, April 2020, we've been approached by Singaporean government because at that moment, in the beginning of pandemics, there was a very, very big concern about food security. Would the government be able to guarantee to Singapore the necessary supply of meat? And then if you look at the statistics, you're going to note that in 2 months, volumes more than double. And in Brazil, in spite of all the hurdles we were ourselves facing with COVID, because we faced many hurdles. Remember that our plants are labor intensive. We have in one normal plant 1,000 to 2,000 employees, okay? And that was an environment where it's very, very likely that COVID would spread. So the sector acted very fast with the government and with the industry associations in order to prevent and to put in place a lot of rules for us to control the COVID. Actually, these rules that Brazilian industry implemented were then copied in other markets and in other countries. The point is that very fast we adapted to the new scenario in spite of the huge costs and losses in the yield of the production, and we catered Singapore. And we more than doubled our supply for a couple of months so that the government could build their national reserves. Same happened with China. That's the second example, where we supplied and we keep supplying the national reserve for pork. And for beef, it was the same situation. So the resilience and the fast response of this industry that began 100 years ago is very, very good. Eventually, and to start concluding my presentation today, I would like to talk a little bit about the approach the animal protein industry gives to sustainability. And it's a three-way approach. What I mean is that we don't work alone. We are partnered with the government, we are partnered with the associations, and because we are working together as a group and as a team, we are able to deliver the sustainability that we are looking for. And I give some examples, okay, that I brought here. Very, very scattered examples, but we have a very, very consistent environmental legislative framework, which is very restrictive and controlling. My colleagues before have talked about that. MAPA, the Minister of Agriculture, ABC plan, which we have seen before as well, is state-of-the-art and enables us to keep sustainable. We have also non-governmental organizations working in the sustainability area with very different products from each other. And in this sense, we cater almost all the important biomes of Brazil. And finally, the associations themselves, they prepare and they implement sustainability plans and they train not only the integrated farmers we have, but also the producers. Finally, talking about the companies itself, we have many examples of the leaders of Brazilian industries, and here we have some of them, not all of them. There's no space for, in one slide for all of them. But these companies, they all have their sustainability programs. They are consistent sustainability programs. And I'd like to encourage you, if you have interest in this issue, to download online their sustainability programs. You can see how deep they go. Very aggressive goals for carbon, for example. But not only that, it's a very comprehensive program that each of these companies have. And one secret, I think, is partnering with our suppliers. We partner and we demand from our suppliers the same plans, and we demand from our suppliers solutions as well. So I take the example of DSM, who have developed a program and a product that reduces from 90% the emission of CO2 and methane gas in the livestock of milk cows. And this enables the increase of our production without harming the environment. Finally, what is our perspective? What is the sector's view? Okay? First of all, we think as a sector that we should be aligned, fully aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Without this alignment, we will get nowhere. So we have to align ourselves, okay? And these goals and actions, which are now translated to the plans of each of these companies, have to be tangible and measurable. But there is one important point here. Perhaps I will repeat what my colleague said, but I'll say that in another way. In the animal protein industry, okay, sustainability is directly linked to zootechnical performance. What I mean is that how do we get sustainable in animal protein? We have to be efficient. efficiency in the food supply chain and efficiency in the management of our farms and our animals is crucial because it's a long chain, as I said, okay? If we don't have consistent technical efficiency, innovation, and science behind this industry, which is very scientific, by the way, we will get nowhere and will not be sustainable, okay? But my opinion, to close up my speech today, is that Brazil is doing a very, very good job. The players are working together, as I said, and we are setting the mark, and we are giving a very high benchmark to other countries in terms of how sustainable our production can be and how can Brazil supply the food security needs of the world, okay? Thanks very much, and I pass on to André.
Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here. In this combination between my home country and the country that became my home, Singapore, over the last 6 years living here. So my name is André Menezes. I'm co-founder and CEO of Tindo, and I'm going to share a bit more about Tindo with you, the sector we are and the reasons, trying to offer new lenses to everything we've been discussing here, actually. And many of the things I will bring will connect to what colleagues have already said, but trying to add a different angle onto the why we're doing what we're doing, and how the plans are looking forward for our sector and for our company. So as a brief introduction, I'm an engineer by training. I was born and lived in Brazil most of my life, and I studied engineering in Brazil. I did have exposure to the energy sector in Germany with Siemens, to the investment sector in Brazil, and as part of that journey, I went to BRF, where I had a chance of working with this gentleman here, and I had a very privileged opportunity to learn everything in the meat industry, literally from the farm, from the grains, all the way first to the port and to the forks in Brazil. And then in the second part of this journey with the very Singaporean SETS, as you know, part of a joint venture here, which then became Country Foods as another portion of that journey, in which I managed to learn the other side of that business, from importing, distributing, delivering to both supermarkets, restaurants, caterers, airlines, military, and all the channels that we're present in. So those all prior, obviously, to founding the startup that we started here in Singapore in April 2020, Tindo, which is the one I'm going to share more about with you. But before we start, and some people do ask a lot where the Tindo is the dating app, so I just want to make clear where Tindo comes from. There was a physicist back in the 1800s whose name was John Tyndall, and he was the first scientist who managed to understand the correlation or the heat absorption properties of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that, as you probably know and made the link already, it's the base understanding of the greenhouse gas effect. And since everything we do in our company is related to sustainability and reduction of greenhouse gas effect and climate change, we decided to give Mr. John Tyndall a nod and call Tindo our chicken made from plants. Many of you here, depending on where I go and where I talk, many of you will say, well, but hold on a second. Is it chicken? But how can it be made from plants? Chicken is a bird. You shouldn't call it chicken. So to that, again, I'm not here to try to convince anyone of anything, but I like to go back to other examples and try to get ourselves out of the paradigm in which we are included and involved and offer different points of views, right? So you're probably, and being an engineer, I couldn't avoid this, but you're probably very familiar with the measure of a horsepower. And I don't think anyone ever stopped, other than engineers, obviously, to understand what is a horsepower. And if you go back again in history, you will realize that James Watt was trying to showcase to potential clients how his new steam engines were more efficient than the incumbent ones that were there. But most of his clients were actually using horses to do the work instead of steam engines. And then he came up with the the way of communicating, bringing familiarity through the unit of how much work that could be performed by a horse over a certain amount of time, pulling a certain amount of weight. And today, fast forward to today, no one feels weird or reacts the same way I said about the chicken, but chicken made for planes and what, when we say that a Ferrari has 769 horsepower, no one thinks there is horsepower under the bonnet, or challenges the fact that it shouldn't be called horsepower. So the reason I'm saying this is just to bring a different angle and paradigm, not to challenge, but it's part of the transition, and transitions are always questions. But since we're talking about cars and transitions, maybe we go to the streets of Chicago in the late 1800s, and on the left side, you will see that it was all taken by horses and carriages. And if you go back to the records, you will see that when cars were invented, the overall perception from society is that cars were just a fad. Cars would never become a common element of transport that would overtake and take over the importance of horses and carriages. And there were many reasons for that. Today it sounds ridiculous, and why they couldn't see it, it's so obvious. But in fact, there were no gas stations. There was no asphalt. Cars need a more smoother surface, obviously gasoline. And back then they were noisy, they would break down, maybe they wouldn't be as comfortable as a carriage and the horses. And there was also obviously the emotional attachment to the horses in many cases. Then fast forward to early 1900s, which a few decades down the road after that invention, and you barely see any horses on the streets. Similarly, as you all have been showcasing here how the agriculture has evolved so much in Brazil and around the world, we used to rely a lot in animal traction for agriculture and for many other aspects. And obviously today we don't need that, and we do it much better. Yeah, we have developed technologies to do that makes us all more efficient. We don't really need to rely on that technology that's thousands of years old. That has served us very well so far, but probably we can do better moving forward. Similarly, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but in the US, whaling industry was the 5th largest industry sometime in the 1800s, second half of the 1800s. That's not a long time ago. And one of the biggest and most important uses of the products coming from the whaling industry was whale oil, which was used to make sure that streets were well lit, of all the streets there. No one today, at least no one that I'm aware of, is moaning the death of the whaling industry. And we have found very good ways to light up the streets and to make sure we get what we want, the lights, making sure everything is safe, secure, less energy, better way of doing, without relying on oil. The thing, though, is that we cannot really expect the broader population to stop relying on animals overnight. It's very hard. I did mention about cars, how hard it was for population to understand that. I didn't mention about even the whaling, frankly. All the infrastructure was set. Electricity was not widely distributed. And we needed to get the lamp developed, right? The lighting systems were not back then developed. So not at all obvious. And it's even more relevant with meat. And it's funny because now we are approaching the lunchtime, and I'm sure we look at this and we crave it because we all love meat. It's so delicious. We love the texture. We love the taste. And we love all those great recipes we can see. In fact, if I ask you, what is your favorite meal you ever had? It's very likely that you're going to say that it was a meat or fish, but definitely an animal protein right at the center, followed by some sides in a very nice restaurant, very likely traveling, but with that overall food experience. And you never think, the thing that's very funny and that struck me when I was in the meat industry is that we love all about that of meat. And that's unquestionable. The thing that we love it, not because of the way it's made, but despite the way it's made. And I made sure to make it blurry here because then, have lunchtime and everyone wants to be hungry and have good meat outside. But I guess the interesting thing to me here was at least that when I was, as a meat lover, going to the factories, and they were the best run factories, as Rogério was saying, with the best possible standards. I personally didn't crave meat for a while. And I was questioning myself, if we love the texture, if we love the taste, is there any way that could be potentially more efficient, that could be potentially more effective to translating and producing meat as an ingredient out of grains? Because really, we don't really like it because of the way it's made, but because of the way it tastes. Interestingly, and just if you look at the climate change and the greenhouse gas emission drivers, you will see obviously everyone is well aware of energy and transportation as key drivers. And there are many things being done on that front. Energy has been increasingly supported and invested in new technologies, a greener matrix of energy, and lots still to be done, but that's moving well. Transportation, we're seeing that right in front of us. More efficient cars, biofuel. Brazil, by the way, has probably the most successful biofuel program in history of the world. And translating instead of oil to bio plant-based fuel for cars. But in food, which is very sizable contributor, we still have a lot to do, and we're just starting. And the reality is that actually animals are not the only answer. So speaking of craveable foods, which is what we actually are looking for, you can have craveable foods that deliver on what we want in texture, taste, protein profile, calories, fat, obviously having no cholesterol, and a lot more benefits you can have without animals being involved. So back to the point why chicken, you can do a lot of, in our case, chicken dishes that you would barely be able to distinguish, and at times you wouldn't, or you may even prefer, without any chicken. And those are all shots, actually, by the way, that are real shots made in restaurants around the world, including here in Singapore, that are serving our product, Tindo, currently. And reducing the reliance on animal farming is at the center of very key topics over the next few decades. It's no secret that sustainability, animal welfare, and food security are topics that they are already very relevant. They are increasing the relevance. They have been increasing, but we all know that by 2050 we have to be able to do things on a much better way than we do today to feed 10 billion people with a protein-rich diet on a sustainable way. That's especially relevant, as I said, a population growing with 10 billion and consumption per capita growing as our countries and our families become more affluent. We have access to high-quality protein, and we reduce the reliance on a carb-rich diet and increased protein. That's what happens. We have an increased consumption to a level that, if we keep expanding the way it is, it's just simply not sustainable. And there are limits that are inherently connected to animal farming, the genetics of the animal, for example. One thing that very, very interesting, being an engineer and being part of the meat industry, and as Rogerio said, even the most efficient meat industry, and Rogerio mentioned very well the importance of being efficient because it's a long chain, because you have so many steps, because you have the importance of the cost of the grain into the animal, because so much grain is needed to feed the animal and transform that into meat. So all of those aspects are well run, very well run by the meat industry, and thanks to that we're able to feed 8 billion people now, but they might not be enough to feed 10 billion people with an increased consumption per capita. Plant-based foods can be part of the solution, not the only solution. I'm not here to convince anyone to go vegan. In fact, I'm not even a vegan myself. But we don't really need to eat meat 3 times, 4 times a day. And in many cases, we're not giving away any experience. As I said, the same dishes, craveable, same recipes, same texture. We don't really need animals in every single meal of our day. And we have learned over the last few decades to do that. The good thing about this, though, in comparing plant-based chicken, and I'm not saying specifically only Tindo, but Tindo included, we actually, by design, are using 74% less land on average, 88% less greenhouse gas emissions, and 82% less water. Sounds crazy, it sounds like rocket science, but it's not really. It's just that the meat industry, despite being very well run, especially in places like Brazil or the US, it's inherently inefficient, as we are basically producing the ingredient as a byproduct of a living being instead of producing the meat from the get-go That's why it's important to. That's why it's more efficient. Just like any other transition, however, the path is not smooth. It's not easy to convince me and you and every one of us to remember when we're ordering food to try not to have any more food. We were all educated as having meat as the best ingredient you can have. High protein, great nutritional profile, delicious. So that transition is extremely hard. And many of you may have seen so much bad press about the end of plant-based. Is it flattening? Beyond is going down, and IPO, the stock shares after IPO went down. But we have reason to believe that the category is just starting. And if you look at our journey, in less than 18 months, Dingro was actually already available in 1,500 restaurants, and restaurants only for now, groceries in the future, in 9 countries. I'm actually now based in Chicago, growing our business in the US. US became our biggest market. We launched in March. We launched in the UK in April and Germany in June. Those are the top 3 markets in the world, and they already represent 90% of our business, and we've been able to grow. Still a lot to do, but we have hundreds of distributors. We have thousands of restaurants, and the growth is very encouraging. The reception is very encouraging to see how it is. All of this with our company that started here in Singapore in April 2020, when the crisis of COVID was at its height, and the food security topic was, of course, very top of mind for all of us, especially living here, given the high reliance on imported food and the absolute impossibility of converting the land in Singapore to produce meat for our own population. As the transition started to accelerate, there's still a lot to be done. And I get asked a lot, what is it missing? What is next? What do we need to do to get people to eat plant-based? What's the problem that is not, everyone doesn't give up meat so quickly? Well, it's not an easy transition, just like everything else I mentioned. And technology is improving, the products are getting better, the price is coming down, education is starting to develop. But it's a combination. To change a paradigm that's so relevant, it's a combination of policies, technology, education, and all of that enabled by long-term patient capital. This is why this industry has been on the spotlight and developing so much and so well over the last 10, 15 years especially. There's a reason, though, that investors are so excited about it. Yes, you may have some short-term concerns given the performance of some companies, but the reality is that we're scratching the surface of a $1.4 trillion market today. That's only growing. That's the meat market. And as I said, plant-based, I'm not suggesting here that plant-based is the only solution, but a 10% would make a huge impact on the planet, and it would create very sizable business opportunities. And it would also support on food security, would support on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And it's just, even if it's a tiny bit of a $1.4 trillion market. So to close, and just to, since we're here with Brazil and Singapore, I just wanted to, for me, it's so interesting to see the connection between, and it's a blessing to be here after all our colleagues presenting, because obviously Brazil is the most powerful, or one of the most powerful agricultural powerhouses in the world, and Singapore already faces and will increasingly face the challenges that in the future many countries will. Singapore, with its limited resources and dense population and increased purchase power, it just gives us all the evidence of how critical food security is, and Singapore has been very carefully planning from diversification of sources to diversification of origins and proteins, and now more recently a very strong push and support into plant-based, cell-based, and others. That's already the reality for Singapore. That will most likely be the reality for China. That will be most likely be the reality for many countries in the Middle East and many countries as the water becomes less available, or many states in the US, as we're probably seeing. So that reality that Singapore is seeing and moving ahead right now, given its limitation of land, its high density, and being one progressive, moving ahead, and one of the first and fastest movers in this space, it's certainly a sign of what's about to come for every country. And it's obvious that if you want to feed a population using the land is not enough, the water availability is not enough, and more solutions need to be designed. Brazil, on the other hand, as everyone presented, I don't need to repeat here, is an incredible powerhouse that can be part of that strategy, and more than that, also be part of that innovative drive. Just how everything has happened over the last few decades on increasing the yield, bringing the crops up from the south to the center west, and keep developing technology, as our colleagues have actually shared, would be a fundamental step. I'll finish here, and I'll be more than happy to take questions very soon. I think this is probably the last one. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share a bit with you, and I remain available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you as they make their way off. Yeah. Thank you. Right, that's the end of our panelists and our panel of discussions. Thank you so much. Join me as I thank all our panelists and presenters. Thank you so much, everybody. Right, how are you feeling? Okay. Maybe you might want to stretch out a little bit, where you're seated, just arch your back forward a little bit so that you can feel the tension right behind. Yeah, maybe you want to put up your hands up a little bit. Yeah, go on ahead. Go on ahead, whatever works for you. Yeah, just stretch it out. There you go. Right, thank you. Now it's time for our question and answer segment, which a lot of people are waiting for. In fact, I was outside during the middle of the talks, and a lot of people are coming up to me, when's the question and answer? When's the question and answer? So there's a QR code, please scan it, all right? Because right after this, we'll jump into the question and answer segment. And this will be moderated by ABRAPA's director, Mr. Marcelo Montero, who will be up and he will assist us in the moderation of our question and answer segment. All right. How about a big round of applause for Mr. Marcelo Montero, ABRAPA's director. So if you have any questions, scan the QR code, and then Mr. Montero will assist in the process.
I don't think I'll need this as well. Okay. We'll just leave this screen the way it is. I think it should work. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. And before we start, I would like to call here on stage to join me for this moderation session. Her Excellency Ambassador Eugenia Beltrames, please join me here at the stage. Please, let's welcome Ambassador Eugenia. I would also like to invite up here Mr. Lucas Fiuza, Director of Apex Brazil, please. And Júlio Busato, President of ABRAPA, the Brazilian Cotton Growers Association. Ambassador Eugenia, Excellencies, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Embassy of Brazil in Singapore and Apex Brazil for putting together such a high-profile program, the first AgriTalks Brazil-Singapore. The presentations today truly expressed all the potential and opportunities for business development between our two countries. I am personally pleased with the high level of the audience engagement already with the amount of questions that I have already got through Slido and questions up here in my notebook. During this productive morning, we had rich insights on how Brazil and Singapore complement each other and could cooperate in the food, fiber, and definitely renewable fuels as well, ranging in various ways. starting from pure commodity trading to a wide range of sophisticated, value-added, ag tech, food tech, climate tech, and digital strategies. We learned today that in the past few decades, Brazil has become an agricultural powerhouse, taking advantage of its natural comparative advantages with sustainability and leverage with the research and technology from companies like Abrapa. Curiously, and I have been in Singapore time enough to see by myself, I've been here for over 2 years. Over the same period of time, Singapore has turned into Asia's top financial, services, logistics, and innovation hub. Both countries are global leaders in different and complementary fields, and now converge towards a digital, innovative, and sustainable economy. Brazil can help Singapore reach its 30 by 30 goals, as we heard here today by Mr. Chan, and much more. And Singapore could certainly help Brazil to increase its presence in Asia, specifically the ASEAN countries. Brazilian companies are already taking advantage, as we saw today, of the location, institutional, and competitive advantages of Singapore to scale their global operations. I think Abrapa and Cotton Brazil are an example. We are here because we see Singapore as the best place to be, the best hub in Asia. And not only Abrapa, several other Brazilian companies are already based in Singapore. Singaporean companies like Olam are also scaling up their operations in Latin America from Brazil. And I'm very pleased to have their leadership here as well, joining us and with this fantastic presentation, Ashok, you delivered to us. I'm certain that there's much more room for collaboration between us. Moreover, win-win cooperations between Brazilian entrepreneurs, Davi, André, and Singaporean institutions are showing us that there are no limits to what can be achieved between Brazil and Singapore. My goal today is to be the moderator of AgriTalks. I'm very flattered and pleased, Ambassador, to be chosen for this very important role, to be here wrapping up and delivering the questions that have already been asked, and also allowing everybody to participate. And if you have questions for the presenters, you may either raise your hand, and we'll make sure you get a microphone and can ask your questions directly, or you can use the QR code on the screen to directly ask the questions. I'll get the questions here. I got several here already. And for the speakers, since we have a short period of time, I'll ask you to be brief in your answers so that we can get more of the questions answered along our Q&A session. And for the authorities here, please feel free to jump in as you feel that you need to complement any question or any remarks that I have been making, and then just make this a sound and productive conversation at this stage of our AgriTalks. So, the first question here is Dr. Moretti. What is the program for agricultural waste in Brazil?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, when I was a researcher, I used to work on reduction of post-harvest losses and food waste. So besides all the work that we do in terms of research and development, we have public policies, we have food banks, and we have other strategies to minimize post-harvest losses, to minimize food losses on the whole production chain. So all the way from farm to fork, We have different programs. We still have a huge problem in terms of the cold chain that is not very well established in Brazil. But we have been working on different technologies in different Embrapa research centers in partnership with the other public institutions and the private sector.
Thank you, Dr. Moretti. I think there are a couple questions here for Mr. Chan. Mr. Chan is no longer here, so there's very specific questions regarding, for example, what's the progress of the 30 by 30 plan. But I think he would be the key person to answer. And he also talked another question about insects. What type of insects was he talking about? But I think the best. So I move on. Three questions for him. So I'll move on here with Dr. Moretti. Another question for you. So, any research center that is being set in Singapore, since you have 43 different research centers in Brazil, any plans to send a researcher to Singapore?
Not at this point, but maybe after this fruitful morning here, we can discuss with our partners here of having what we call international laboratory abroad. We already have in the U.S., we have in France, we were discussing in the UAE, so and we are very much interested in Southeast Asia. So that's a very good opportunity.
Following up with you, again, do you expect any changes in agricultural policies in Brazil following the change in administration?
Well, this is something that it's to be expected, right? This new government, they have more of a social vision in terms of developing small growers, developing smallhold farmers. Although we have also been working, 30% of our R&D projects are focused on smallholders. So there are some changes, of course, but I believe that Brazil will keep contributing very significantly for the food security in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Moretti. There is another question here that also I think should be directed to you. It's saying that sometimes we get some negative news on international news about Brazilian farming, and what you showed here seems very different from what some vehicles end up showing. So, why do you think that is this way?
Okay, I think we need to do a better job in terms of communication, and that's why I've been traveling all over the world together with APEX and the embassies in different countries, is to show that Brazilian agriculture is a science-based agriculture, that we have data and we have science and we have research backing up our agricultural development. We have, of course, people that just spread the information, the fake news that come to their iPhone or come to their WhatsApp, and of course we have a commercial interests that we need to, of course, to fight. But the best way to change this is telling the truth, showing that yes, we do have problems, but yes, we can increase production on a sustainable manner.
Could I add?
Yes, please, Ambassador.
Is this on? Yeah. So thank you. If I could just add to what Dr. Moretti has just commented on. So there was a question about a concern. There was this concern about continuity. In Brazil, we have just had presidential elections. A new government was elected. The new government is taking, the president's inauguration is taking place on January 1st. And I mean, I'm having, I have been with the Brazilian Foreign Service for the past 33 years now. The party that won the election, the presidential election in Brazil, is a party that has been in power, that has been in government in the past. And this party was known to promote Embrapa's role in the Brazilian government, as few others have been known to. In fact, Embrapa's golden age, Embrapa is a very efficient government agency. Its golden age was in the recent past. So my bet is that, if anything, the new government is going to promote Embrapa's visibility and to continue investing and maybe even increase investment in technology research. Again, adding to a different comment that was made here, a question that was received about the international image of Brazilian agriculture. This is, of course, something that has the international image of a country is something that is built on an everyday basis. Every country invests in their international image. This is something that is done hand in hand with the private sector, but mostly this has to be done by governments, and in any given government by their foreign service. So again, I would say that with the government that is going to take over from January 1st, again, what we saw in the past was a concern with the international image of the country, with the image of our agriculture, which is an agriculture, as we saw along by hearing to all the panels this morning, is an agriculture that is based on science, on technology. In Brazil, agriculture is technology. In Brazil, technology is in agriculture. This is something that we are very confident about. And if there is a problem of perception abroad, this is what we are doing, as Dr. Moretti just mentioned. This is what we're doing right now, sharing information with a well-informed, high-level audience, as the public present here this morning, sharing with our Singaporean audience what we know in Brazil. We invest in science and technology for our agriculture. That is the fact on the ground, and perception. If there is any need for correction of perception, this is what the government is working on and will continue working on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please, Lucas.
Thank you. Yes, just addressing what the Ambassador just said and Moretti about continuity. It's very important to highlight that independent governments come and go. But the legacy delivered in the last 4 years is very important to remember, that the structural reforms were delivered. And to undo that is not so simple, independent of any diversion in world vision. So we had recently, in the last 4 years, structural long-term reforms, business environment law, economic freedom law, central bank autonomy, incredibly shift from a state-driven economy to a market-driven economy. All-time high record in many export sectors. Those that didn't reach all-time high records reached the last 10-year records, and most of them into the agriculture business, which represents 35% last year of all Brazilian exports and about 26% of our GDP. So this put Brazil on a very interesting track, very strict responsibility fiscal plan, which is going to be inherited by any administration that moves on, and we're certain that this legacy, that it was based on long-term structural reforms, will remain, because not only the market, but the Brazilian people itself had the reference of this new model of administration, And we all have an experience that references, once positive references are established, they keep on going. And as Mr. Moretti said as well, in regard to image and everything, yes, we need to get better with communication. And this is one of the elements we do it right here, right now. I mean, Mr. Moretti, including, thank you very much for his disposal in this marathon, a trip marathon, a worldwide trip marathon, very long distances in a very short time. But there's also a lot about commercial interests. Since Brazil reached a lot of market share, we reached 200 new markets in the last 4 years, and competition reacts. But we keep on going. The truth always prevails, as you could see here today from primary source. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Now, I would like to, there's a question here for moving on next panel to Ashok. Ashok, considering Olam being a well-established multinational Singaporean company that has already been playing a very important role in Latin America, what other areas and what do you think could be done to strengthen and enhance the partnerships between Singapore and Brazil, based on your experience?
I mean, Singapore is a central hub in Southeast Asia, and as you heard others saying, majority of Brazil's products go into Southeast Asia. So we think that based out of Singapore here, we can be the market connect between Brazilian producers and end users in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, Vietnam, and so on. So that's the role we see playing as supply chain managers in the textile value chain.
Thank you, Ashok. Mr. Bussato, following the amazing success of Abrapa Cotton Brazil, are other areas in Brazilian agriculture you're working with that are using the lessons learned from cotton in Brazil?
Sim, nós temos outras cadeias produtivas que também estão trabalhando nesse sentido. Cabe salientar que nós, produtores de algodão, também somos produtores de soja e de milho no Brasil e participamos dessas outras cadeias também. E realmente, o que eu queria dizer sobre essa pergunta da imagem do Brasil, eu diria o seguinte: eu sou produtor e eu gostaria muito de estar agora lá na minha fazenda trabalhando e produzindo. Mas, como eu falei, eu estou passando vários países e nós estamos fazendo o que com isso? Levando a mensagem de como e por quem é produzido o algodão, o milho e a soja no Brasil. Nós temos um programa também que nós levamos os nossos clientes das indústrias de fiação da Ásia para o Brasil, abrimos as porteiras das nossas fazendas e mostramos para eles exatamente tudo o que nós falamos aqui. E eles voltam extremamente impressionados com aquilo que ele vê lá no Brasil. Existem imagens negativas, nós temos maus produtores, sim, como o mundo todo tem, como tem em outros setores, outras profissões. Mas a grande maioria não é assim. A grande maioria é aquilo que nós mostramos aqui. E a imagem que nós precisamos construir, que é a imagem da verdade, e que às vezes é distorcida por questões econômicas ou por pessoas que querem se autopromover. Então, a nossa missão, como produtor, justamente é mostrar essas verdades e mais produtores lá no Brasil estão fazendo isso que eu estou fazendo aqui em outras partes do mundo.
Thank you, President Bussato. And then we have another questions here regarding government change and new administration. I think that's all being taken care of, so that's really clear. And there's one more here. I'm just following the thread to Moretti, to you. Quite demanded here by our audience, Mr. Dr. Moretti. That's the question is regarding carbon. So you talked about carbon. And okay, considering how sustainable Brazilian agriculture already is, what are your thoughts on carbon emission standards in the world today and how they're managed? And just as a personal remark, Singapore has the strategy of becoming one of the carbon trading hubs of the world. So it's really a hot topic in Singapore right now.
Okay. As I already mentioned in my presentation, we have this low carbon agriculture plan that is contributing to decarbonize our agriculture during the last at least 30 years. We already developed with the private sector the carbon neutral beef. And how we did that. Animals, they give off methane, and then you have the agricultural component and the forestry component. They sequestrate the carbon from the atmosphere, and then the balance is neutralized. I see many opportunities for our agribusiness sector, agriculture, livestock, and forestry systems to move forward. And as I mentioned, in other production chains, in coffee, cotton, they are already doing as was shown here today. So our pledge is to be a net zero economy by 2050, and if that depends on agriculture, I have no doubt we will do it.
Thank you. Moving on back to the fashion and fiber panel, David. Never know, I'll call you David or Davi. Both, yeah. A few questions for you here. Realistically, what do you think it would take for large established fashion houses to move completely towards sustainable models? That's the first one. Okay, you can take this one and I'll ask another.
That's a great big question, and I have a bit of intense opinion about it. I don't think it will come from them. The fashion cycle and the fashion industry is orchestrated in a way that the commitments of how big brands operate are just too big to steer away from them. So that's a big of the energy and the purpose we have in building Cariúma on designing things from scratch. I also understand how we're starting from zero and how facilitated it is for us to do things differently. But as one small example that I mentioned, the role of the agents. Imagine the agents that source finished products for Vans or Nike. It is completely, it's very hard how much power they have in the organization, how they orchestrate, how the brands rely to produce and deliver the products on time. So starting from scratch is where I think the answers will be, at least for the coming 10, 20 years. So in short, in our case, in fashion, my personal opinion is that the answers will not come from where the problem was created.
Okay, following up with you here. Besides choosing the right raw materials, or recycled materials, how do you not compromise on quality?
Fantastic. And that's the trick of the trade. Actually, it's in every single detail of it. Giving a few examples. It takes 8 to 10 months for any shoe factory to start working with us. We go, and it's not about auditing the SG side, but how the production is managed. We are and that's very specific on shoes, but we're the only vulcanized shoe in the world with outsole stitching. If you have worn a vulcanized shoe, you see that it breaks here after a few months. We provide an extra stitching. That's a world of difference in a shoe factory, because the finished product goes back to production, and it's invisible. If it's off, rejected. So again, it is in many steps on understanding a lot about shoe production. Another one, we own all the tooling. The molds, the lasts, everything, we produce ourselves. Every last that is where the shoe is mounted is scanned 3D every 6 months. Because just the mounting starts to do wear and tear that changes the size experience of a shoe. And we offer half sizes. On the length, it's a change of 4 millimeters. And that's the biggest measurement in our product. Imagine in the others. And that's the difference between having an incredible shoe or the one that gives you blisters. It can look good, it can have the right weight, but if in the end you wear it and it gives you blisters, that's the trade-off we work hard not to offer the consumers. So quality is it's a big answer. Yeah, non-negotiable. Yeah.
Quality, sustainability. To finish up with fashion, I have just one more question for Mr. Busato. Actually, 2 questions. I'm putting these 2 together. First, not exactly fiber, but I think you're the right person to answer. Non-GMO or soybeans are available to export from Brazil, non-GMO soybeans. And the second part is regarding the port congestion. Is it better now since after the bottlenecks we had in the post-COVID period?
Sim, hoje muitos produtores no Brasil estão produzindo soja não transgênica para atender nichos de mercado, e nós temos tranquilamente potencial de produzir muito disso, né? O diferencial, eu acho que seria custo, porque as sojas transgênicas, elas são mais produtivas do que as não transgênicas. Então, isso acaba onerando o custo de produção para nós agricultores. Mas, perfeitamente, nós podemos, tendo essa necessidade, tendo essa demanda, produzir soja não transgênica. A outra pergunta, quanto aos portos. Olha, nós melhoramos muito os nossos portos. Em termos de logística, nós temos um problema, que é o custo da logística. O Brasil iniciou errado o sistema de logística. Nós transportamos praticamente tudo em roda de caminhões, quando deveríamos usar mais trens, mais rios. É o que nós estamos fazendo, mas isso são investimentos que demandam tempo. Agora, por outro lado, esse custo acaba sendo absorvido por nós, produtores, na diferença de comercialização com outros produtores, no caso do algodão, os australianos e os americanos. Agora, quanto à quantidade, nós melhoramos muito os processos nos portos. Nós tivemos 2 meses que nós exportamos mais de 700 mil toneladas de algodão. Quer dizer, nós podemos exportar 4 milhões de toneladas de algodão no ano, e nós só exportamos 2,3. E a soja da mesma forma. Então, o fluxo de navio tem sido muito bom, e nós tivemos realmente um problema mais de containers no mercado mundial do que navios graneleiros para trazer soja.
Thank you, Mr. Busato. Now move on to the panel, Agri-Innovation panel. Francisco Jardim, please share your views of Singapore's food tech ecosystem and the potential synergies with LATAM's ecosystem. Please, I would like to ask the same questions to Trento, so if you could both elaborate on this question. I think it could fit both of you.
Yeah, so I can tell you what I've seen from our entrepreneurs backed in Latin America. Brazil especially is 50-55% of our portfolio. Many of them see Singapore as the best platform to enter Southeast Asia, as access to talent and using this as a hub to access the rest of the market. Remember that the difference between the agriculture in Brazil, from the profile of crops, from the size of the farms, from the strategies in go-to-market and pricing from these startups, are very different than the ones we've seen here. Perhaps the biggest parallel that we're seeing in Brazil right now versus things we've seen explode here in the region, Southeast Asia, is in the e-grocery sector, so the marketplaces in fruits and vegetables. Here in the region, we've had fantastic success stories. Brazil and the rest of the region has been slow in being able to solve this disintermediation of the value chain in specialty crops. But I think this is probably where I see the most correlation, where we're catching up, is in the e-grocery marketplace.
Well, that's a good question, and I will make a link with no-GMO soybean and also with plant-based. One topic that is very important in a conversion is traceability. We have non-GMO soybean in Brazil. What we need is to have transparency for the buyers. So traceability, based on blockchain, digital technology, we can guarantee that. Embrapa has already a research project working on soybean traceability and other products. For plant-based, it's the same. We can have, in Brazil, plant factories, like we are doing this process with Israel, when a new startup is coming to Brazil working with BRF, and the opposite. We have here some companies already working, Brazilian entrepreneurs developing companies here, but we can bring Brazilian startups to Singapore and understand disruptive topics that we don't have enough knowledge or startups in Brazil, but we have the big distributors there, like BRF, JBS, and other companies. So I see a big synergy. We have space, we have a validation potential. As you develop ideas here, technologies here, you can validate in Brazilian farms, you can validate in Brazilian market, and have that as an example to explore new markets in the world, in partnership, Brazilian companies and Singapore ones.
Thank you. Please, Piusa.
It's very quick. Just remember here about the logistics issue. We did a homework in the last 4 years. We executed the largest concessions program in history. So many seaports, roads, railroads, they all got privatized, and this is coming. So in the upcoming years, we're going to see a gradual enhancement in our logistics sector. And in regard to innovation, I would like to remind that Apex Brazil has a very interesting program called Scale Up Brazil, which is also a two-way road. We work with foreign partners, which we help accelerate foreign innovation solutions to scale on our continental economy. So this is very good for you to know that we have this possibility to cooperate in between foreign innovation in order with our innovative ecosystem and market to literally scale up.
Thank you. A final question to Mr. Jardim. Are there challenges for foreign investments into Brazilian startups? If there are, how can they be overcome?
No, I think until 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a big question about, and remember, venture capital is about the outliers paying the bill. So you need to be able to build very large companies for this to be viable. And until a few years ago, I think there was a major question of whether you could build these big companies in Brazil. And as we saw, with 37 tech unicorns ranging from financial services, urban mobility, SaaS, and several other of these categories, I think this has been answered. You can build very large outlier companies that make investing in early stage venture capital, and more growth stage venture capital funds have come into Brazil. So we've seen SoftBank, for example, be very active in Brazil over the past 5 years, and now justifying these investments.
Thank you. Thank you, Jardim. Now we move on to our last panel. The panel with the two gentlemen, Moraes, Rogério Moraes and André. Rogério Moraes gave you the news that Singapore chicken rice is not with Singaporean chicken. And Andre, who wants to make Tindo chicken instead of Brazilian chicken and Singaporean chicken rice, right? So that's really what some of the takeaways that we got from that panel. But, well, questions here. Andre, which are your best performing markets now? And how are you managing your operations in that regard?
Thank you for the question and for the interest. It's working right, yeah. So we have recently launched this year has marked our launch into the US, UK, and Germany. Those are the top 3 markets in our sector in the world, and that is reflected in our performance so far. US became our #1 market, followed by the UK, followed by Germany, despite the fact that it was only recently launched. It's still early in the journey, obviously, but that combination already accounts for over 90% of our business, and we foresee that that's not going to change in the coming years. And there was a question about operations. I don't know specifically what was the question, if it's about where do you produce, where do you sell. I would like to have
okay, yeah, that's okay. There are several other questions here, so you can answer in the following one, because there are 2 here for you that I'll make one. How scalable is plant-based industries like Tindo, and protein cost is increasing. How are you going to manage that? And there's another one, say, can you bring this protein from Brazil? So yeah, so I got 3 questions in one.
So scalable.
How you make it scalable?
Oh, yeah.
Costs are
Costs in
increasing, and can you source from Brazil?
Yeah. So if it's scalable, absolutely yes. I get asked many times, how hard it is to, pitch and convince investors that this is a good opportunity. And I actually flip it around and say, like, if we had a blank piece of paper and there was no animal farming right now, there was no plant-based or animal farming, and we were pitching a meat industry with all of its complexity and its extremely long chain, and would actually pitch that, we're going to build this system that are going to slaughter and, serve 80+ billion animals a year to a population of roughly 8 billion humans, and that, extremely complex supply chain, obviously making sure everything is at the highest quality and all that, that's very hard, and that's actually inherently extremely inefficient. Plant-based is not here. There's no dilemma or, there's no conflict between plant-based and scalability. It's actually supposed to be way more scalable as the technologies have already developed themselves to become. And following that same route, there is also no conflict here between being cheaper eventually and being plant-based versus being animal. In fact, the reason of existence of plant-based is, to utilize less resources. And as long as resources are not for free, which some of them still are, fresh water from rain is not charged, and there's no control of exporting water. That's still for free. Land is still very cheap. But as long as resources are charged for, plant-based will inherently be way more efficient and potentially way cheaper, simply because we're using less resources. Now, why is it more expensive today? It goes back to scale. And it goes also back to the tremendously incredible job that the meat industry has done globally of becoming extremely efficient. And that has something that we all have to celebrate, because it allowed us all to feed high-quality protein around the world. But plant-based itself is still a tiny fraction of the market, and the supply chain is not optimized yet. As soon as that is leveled to the same scale, it's easy to be cheaper. Now, can it be made and produced in Brazil? Absolutely, yes. And some examples were shared by some of the panelists and speakers. There are great colleagues, entrepreneurs in Brazil producing. And also, it's important to emphasize as well that there's no conflict necessarily between a JBS, for example, or BRF and plant-based. JBS has been very clearly positioning itself as a company that provides protein, and that the market and consumer will choose over time whether it comes from animal or plants. And that shows how there's no conflict there, and that shows how Brazil is very well positioned beyond the large corporations, beyond the startups, beyond the ingredient suppliers to make it all happen.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Rogério Moraes, you mentioned that not yet reaching certain markets like Indonesia. What does it take to breach these markets and establish Brazil as a protein supplier there?
Thanks very much for the question. I think that over the years, Brazil has done a tremendous job in terms of reaching new markets, and you can see by the number of countries we reach nowadays, okay? Answering your question, first of all, doing exactly what we are doing today. Showing with facts and data the competitiveness, the advantages that Brazil has as a food supplier, okay? Secondly, what we are doing today as well, bringing the private sector together with the government to deliver this speech to the stakeholders. Brazil has been preparing itself very, very well in the past years in terms of having a governmental structure overseas, such as the agricultural attachés, to support all this development. And then, finally, I think it's crucial to partner and to understand the local needs of markets such as Indonesia, okay? We have to partner with Indonesians to understand where we can jump in on the gaps of their supply chain in order to supply and to fulfill this gap, and then working together not as a threat to the local industry, but as a solution to the local industry, we reach the market. I can give a simple example of what we do in China, okay? China is #1 producer of chicken in the world, okay? Still, they import a lot from Brazil, and still they are #1 market for Brazilian exports. Why is that? Because we don't compete with Chinese. We partner with them. We supply what they cannot supply in their local production. Meaning, for instance, I give a concrete example. They have plenty of chicken breast, they have plenty of chicken leg, they have no chicken paws. Brazilians go there, and it's the #1 product for China, chicken paws. So the key, in my opinion, is to partner and to fulfill the gaps and not compete with local producers.
Thank you, Rogério. I mean, your case on China ring my bell here of that in cotton is the same situation. China is the largest cotton grower in the world, and it's our largest client because we produce what they don't have, a certified cotton. So they need our certified BCI cotton to export to some markets, and we are the ones who end up supplying them. So yeah, thanks. There are a few questions here, but about. There are several questions, actually. We have to. I think I have to wrap up. I'm sorry. I'll see if I pick it. André, why is there so little point of sale promotion for alternative protein? Over there. The question was made by Liu.
It's relative in the end of the day, and it depends on the market, it depends on the sector, it depends on the channel, it depends on even the brand. The same could be said, why is there no point of sale promotion for most of the meat you see actually here in Singapore? Then I guess the important thing to understand is that it's still a very nascent industry, and point of sale promotion, whether it's in food services, whether it is in retail, takes a lot of resources and financial resources, and the companies are still nascent. In the case of meat, as we all know, it's a very low margin business, and it's something that my time in BRF, we always, we could do point of sales promotion for higher margins, higher volume items, high volume, higher margins. For plant-based, the volume is still small and the penetration is still not big, but still we see, frankly, quite disproportionately well presented. For example, in the restaurants where we have here in Singapore, most of them actually have point-of-sale presence with branded presence in our product being served in the restaurant. That's not common at all in any meat case. This is something we always dreamt of in the meat industry, and we're never able to do it. So from that perspective, there's a lot, but how much is enough? What are we comparing against, and what are we looking? That depends on which market, perceptions, and how that goes.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I still have a few questions, but I am afraid we have to wrap up. But I would like to leave you, especially the Ambassador Fiuza and Julio with a question that I think really called my attention here. I think in 30 seconds maybe you could comment on. It's I would like to hear more about challenges and opportunities between the two countries in 30 seconds. So what would you say?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. We heard this morning, we had the opportunity of hear both the experience of André Menezes with Tyndall and David Python with Cariúma. These two different experiences, one in the area of fashion with Cariúma and the other one in the area of alternative protein, are examples that the embassy favored for the following reason, because these two talented, young, talented Brazilian entrepreneurs embody a fusion between Brazil and Singapore. André Menezes started with NextGen, moved on to Tyndall. I understand NextGen was a company that benefited immensely from being cared for by Enterprise Singapore. So what we see here in the two companies, two very successful companies, is Brazilian talent coming to Singapore, thriving in Singapore, prospering in a welcoming Singaporean business environment and innovation environment. This is what we aim for at the end of the day, combining the strengths of a large country like Brazil. Brazil is twice the size of the European Union. Just for us to have the idea of scale we are dealing with here. The 27 European Union countries would fit twice inside Brazil. Brazil provides high quality protein, high quality food, high quality grains for something like 160 countries worldwide. Throughout the pandemic we faced recently, Brazil never failed its customers worldwide. We never failed Singapore. We never failed any customer, not even once. We still provided for our internal market, but still we kept our commitments to our customers abroad. Singapore, at the same time, is this country that showed amazing leadership throughout the pandemic. Singapore showed the world how to deal with a pandemic. Everyone who was in Singapore was safe. We all who went through the pandemic in Singapore felt safe because the government was in charge and the government was very much concerned with the safety of everyone. I believe we learned a lot throughout the pandemic worldwide. We learned the hard way, of course. Singapore was an example throughout this terrible situation. From the start, from day one, the Singaporean government advocated for more coordination between countries, not just every country organizing internally against the pandemic in order to protect its citizens. But from the start, Singapore said, we have to coordinate. Governments have to coordinate. We have to have reciprocal recognition of vaccines. We have to have an international COVID vaccination certificate, which amazingly we still do not to this day. The pandemic came and went, and still we all know there is such a thing as the yellow fever international vaccination certificates, but we still do not have an international COVID vaccination certificate, which is something so necessary. But all of this to say that Singapore is a leader, Brazil is a powerhouse. There is no end of absolutely positive perspectives for coordination between Brazil and Singapore. And this view is shared in my view. My feeling is that the private sector in the two countries and the two governments have this, it's very clear, both in the public sector, in the private sector, that more coordination between our two countries is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm totally sure in this sense, and I am a user of these services, that the Embassy of Brazil in Singapore is doing a great job. So thank you very much for you, and extensive to the entire team of the Embassy. Fantastic team you have here.
Bom, eu vou responder da seguinte forma. Todo dia no mundo nascem pessoas. E as pessoas nascem com uma boca. E precisam de roupas. Hoje, 800 milhões de pessoas passam fome no mundo. E se ninguém produzir alimento para essas pessoas que estão chegando, elas se somarão essas 800 milhões de pessoas. O Brasil possui todas as condições de produzir o alimento para esse aumento da população, bem como as roupas que elas vão precisar, de uma forma sustentável, de uma forma rastreável e através do nosso sistema de produção. Nós vamos, no futuro bem próximo, mostrar ao mundo que a nossa agricultura realmente ela ou emite zero carbono ou muito pouco carbono. Então, eu acho que essa é a contribuição que o Brasil pode dar para o mundo, essa é a contribuição que nós, produtores brasileiros, podemos dar para a Ásia, porque é justamente aqui que vai acontecer todo esse crescimento.
Okay, in 30 seconds, it's pretty much clear that the synergy about Brazil and Singapore, it's a complementary win-win case, pretty much clear. Singapore has an extremely talent and displayed great talent for trade and free market practices to be a very important hub for the entire Asia, which is the major market. And Brazil has the scale and the technology to produce all that you don't have here. So we need each other, and we really look forward to enhance this cooperation as much as possible. It's good for both countries, it's good for the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucas. So now I'm handing back to the MC, but before I would like to share my appreciation with all of you for the participation in this very important part of the webinar. I think honestly, I enjoyed a lot, this debate, discussion, following the fantastic presentations that you all delivered. So I'm really pleased with the level of the discussion, level of the presentations, and looking forward to continue interacting with you all after the panel, because all of you I consider good friends. You can ask, and for the audience, you can ask further questions to the panelists. I know I do have some questions here, but the questions were not nominated who to direct to. So please, we're going to be having lunch later, so please direct your questions directly to the speakers, and I'm totally sure they'll be happy to take them. And that's it. So thank you very much. I'll just pass on to our MC. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point in time, I would like to invite for our closing remarks for today, Apex Brazil's Mr. Lucas Fiuza.
Well, thank you very much. Closing remarks are all about gratitude. Thank you for this amazing audience, for being here until now. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Ambassador Eugenia, for such a distinguished leadership in organizing this event and outstanding job here at Singapore representing Brazil. Thank you very, very much for organizing all this mission and being so kind to us here. Thank you very much. Also, special thanks to Mr. Moretti, my friend. I would like to just, after this presentation, once again, I have the pleasure to see. Thank you very much for all that you and your fellow scientists at Embrapa have delivered, not only to Brazil, but to mankind. All the speakers, thank you very much. And I would like to make a special thanks to our distinguished partner in this event here, Cotton Brazil, a project, extremely successful project with Apex Brazil, one of the most successful projects with Apex Brazil. Cotton Brazil gives us a lot of pride, especially myself personally as a Brazilian. I'm very, very proud to work with you. Many of the producers are here. These farmers are true entrepreneurs, Brazilian entrepreneurs. They manage to build an extremely high-level industry that achieved worldwide leadership in production, in exports, in sustainability practices. They have created sustainable best practices, tracking solutions even before this was a world trend in the market demand. And also they have a very, very special care with all the people working with them, with the incredible human resources that they have. And I would like to address these special things here with, through their president, Mr. Julio Busato, which clearly I got the experience to know one of the examples about how they take care of their people. And this is an example that Mr. Busato did personally. I would like to share with you. During COVID pandemic, he literally built a hospital infrastructure at his own expense without any mandatory law to take care of over 1,000 employees during the entire period himself. Please, round of applause. You guys are a true hero for us, and Mr. Julio did that from the heart, a true leader. Thank you very much, and great having you here.
Thank you. And it's my pleasure now to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Eugenia for her closing remarks.
Thank you so much. We're all meeting in a few moments over lunch, and we will continue discussing these matters together. I would just like to say, like Mr. Fiuza from Apex Brazil, how thankful we are to the Brazilian and Singaporean experts who presented the panels this morning, and mostly to the well-informed audience we have here. I recognize so many friendly Singaporean and Brazilian faces. I am personally very thankful to each one of you for having sat with us this morning and shared information with us this morning. We all want to go on to lunch, to having lunch together. I would like to to make a kind of a very brief summing up of what we heard up to now. Beginning from, starting with the last panel. In the last panel, we had a very interesting parallel between animal protein and plant protein, and the conclusion seemed to be it doesn't have to be one or the other. The two solutions can walk hand in hand with a view to providing food security to our two countries, to the world. We had André Menezes with his groundbreaking company, and Rogério Moraes, who has this extensive experience in the more classic protein, private sector providers of protein to the world. Before that, we had both the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and SP Ventures presenting what the Brazilian ecosystem is like in the field of financing ag-techs, financing food techs. This is such a key element, the financing of all of these changes and pioneering transformations for us to have greater reliability and greater sustainability food-wise. Even before that, so we had a very enlightening presentation on sustainable fashion, on Olam's Mr. Ashok described to us how cotton is produced in Brazil, and Mr. Julio Busato, a producer himself, shared his experience in the field. So just to highlight that Cotton Brazil, which is this initiative behind our meeting this morning, is such a positive example of how the private sector goes ahead and delivers something that is truly excellent, truly groundbreaking, truly pioneering. And then the government comes up to help the private sector showcase the excellence of its product abroad. So Brazilian cotton is indeed remarkable. It's unique in the world in the sense that it is traceable. Every bale of cotton is traceable, and it is only awarded the QR code on the packing if it has complied with the more than 800 conditions that have been established domestically in Brazil. And finally, we come to the first panel we heard this morning, which was when we had the Singaporean Food Agency and the Brazilian Embrapa, our very important and dear research government agency, telling us about the importance of public policies, of how government-driven policies are needed and are essential if we want to go ahead with reliability of supply chains, efficiency in production, and sustainability of production. And from the notes I took along this morning, it would seem to me that the conclusion I have arrived at is that efficiency and sustainability are almost synonyms. The pandemic, again, has taught us that what really matters at the end of the day is survival. And for survival, we need food, we need health security, which is something only governments can provide. We need food security. Again, if governments don't coordinate, don't cooperate in order to keep food supply chains working, in order for food production to be sustainable, because unsustainability is no longer affordable for any of us, for any country. My final thought from what I heard this morning would be that both in Singapore and in Brazil, for both the Brazilian government and the Singaporean government, it has become quite clear that there is no going back. These trends towards efficiency, towards sustainability, towards freedom of trade and resilience of supply chains, these trends are here to stay. They are irreversible. There is no going back on sustainability, on scientific and technological efficiency. And we should go on working together, governments, private sector enlightening consumers, helping consumers have access to a product that is more and more efficient and more sustainable. So with that, I would invite each and every one of us to, there is lunch outside. We are going to come back to this room with our lunch and partake of lunch together as we go on discussing these matters. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, my name is Ross. Thank you for being here. We'd like to invite you to lunch, and then after which you can proceed back to this room and have more discussions. And not only that, spread the love, spread the friendship all around. The links between Singapore and Brazil can never be close enough. And we'll support Brazil's quest on the World Cup. Tonight, they take on Switzerland. Have a great day ahead of you. Thank you.